Mr. Chairman, we're live on YouTube.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the August 3rd meeting of Management Audit Committee. August 4th meeting of Management Audit Committee. We appreciate you joining us. We're going to start with a roll call. So doing our roll call, Ms. Bodewins, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, roll call for the August 4th, 2021 meeting. Senator Bouchard,
Excused.
Senator Guru,
Excused. He will be joining us in a little bit. He had a doctor's appointment that he is going to attend to.
Senator James,
Here.
Senator Perkins,
Excused.
Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Gray,
Here.
Representative Sherwood,
Here.
Representative Stivar, Vice Chairman Boner,
Here.
Chairman Barlow.
Here. Thank you very much. Any housekeeping business we need to do? We have our capable staff with us today. So Abigail, Carla, Amanda, anything we need to attend to before we initiate our agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I would just remind people that if your mics are on, the YouTube stream will pick it up, your conversations.
All right. So the caution is your mics pick up conversations in the room. We learned that at our last meeting, apparently. And so we'll caution folks to turn off your mics if you're not intending for your conversation to be public, because we are streaming live. And actually we have a camera in the room as well. So another, I guess someone else is also streaming this, or is this the in-room system, or is the camera in the room the one that is media? Okay, strictly media. Okay, perfect. So we have media joining us as well. Welcome. So we'll start with our agenda. And our first agenda item is the State Auditor Office. We're joined by the Honorable Christy Racinas and some of her folks. This is not Edie, so she will introduce who is with us. Edie is on the agenda, but this is not Edie, and I've forgotten your name. So Madam Auditor, welcome. We thank you. Congratulations on being part of the Cheyenne contingency. And it sounds like you had a very successful Cheyenne Frontier Days. And I know you participated in many of those activities, as did, I'm sure, several others in the room that were able to. So welcome, Madam Auditor, and please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It was a wonderful week and I think very successful. And I think we made up for last year as well while we were at it. So Mr. Chairman, I'm very, very excited to introduce to you all Erin Benskin. She is the relatively new manager of our accounting division, although she has been with our office for about 4 years. So her division is responsible for putting together the annual comprehensive financial report, which you all are familiar with and we've talked about quite a bit. So, and Edie is not in the office this week. She's out of state. So that's why she's not here, but I wanted to introduce you to Erin. Erin is a CPA, which I felt it was a very important to get into that position. So she's here to help me out. So Mr. Chairman, our item on the agenda today is potential dissolution of accounts and funds throughout the state. And that's something we're eager to get done. And this is something that I think we've been having conversations with Senator James for the past, year maybe about. And so we are excited to get this done. And a lot of times these cleanup efforts get put off because they're not, they don't have to be done. They're just nice to get done when we have time. So we have had the ability to make some good headway in cleaning up our entire chart of accounts. For example, expenditure codes. We had something in the system like close to 6,000 active expenditure codes, and we've deactivated many of those. We actually have a listing of those expenditure codes online. We've brought that from about 90 pages down to 50 pages. So it is still very extensive. So this subject of cleaning up funds is really, really, there's some synergy with what our office is already trying to do. So the process of eliminating funds, like most of your endeavors, is somewhat more complicated than it seems on the surface, but completely doable. And so as we have this conversation, I want to point out two statutes which LSO was so good to put in your material, and they're just printed out. It's just on one page. And I'm just going to refer to those. I'm actually going to look at this first statute, or sorry, I'm going to point you to that second statute first, 94212. So summarizing this statute essentially says a fund is only a fund if it is created in statute, and everything else is an account, even if we call it a fund in statute. So in full disclosure, it sounds like there's been some confusion in statutes in prior decades. Now, we, meaning my office, our external auditors, and you all, we often use the word fund. In fact, we use it all the time. And that's accurate to use that, because a fund is an accounting entity defined by accounting standards and by GAAP. So we properly refer to things as funds all the time. But that second statute, we just all need to recognize for statutory purposes, a fund is only a fund if it's created in statute. Everything else is an account or something, even if we refer to them as funds. So the other statute, the longer one, 94204, in particular, Romanets 3 and 4, talks about the auditor's ability in working with agency directors to merge, combine, or segregate funds. And so, said very simply, the auditor's office, in consultation with agencies, can create or merge or eliminate accounts to enable us to properly account for funds. So summing up those two things together for our purpose today, if a fund is created in statute, it has to be uncreated in statute. If an account is created by my office, it can be removed by my office. So we refer to a lot of things as funds, which my office simply, once we all determine it's not necessary anymore, we can deactivate that without legislative intervention. So as we go through this, let me back up. I'm gonna give an example of that, because you might be asking, wow, the SAO can just go willy-nilly create funds like whenever they want. No, not exactly. I mean, there's a lot of reasons we wouldn't want to do that. Erin's real picky. She doesn't just let us create funds. But the best example that I have of that in recent history is the CARES Act money. So the feds dumped $1.25 billion into the coffers, and this was before there was a special session. This was before we had anything. We made the decision to create a new fund, and it's called a fund by accounting standards, and put that money in it because it was incredibly important to me, and I think everyone, to have that segregated. We know exactly what's been spent. We know exactly what's left. And it's very, very transparent and easy to track. Now, that being said, that fund is not statutorily created. So when that money is no longer, when that money is all expended, we can eliminate that account without legislative intervention. That statutorily, that is not a fund. So that can be cleaned up without. So the tricky part is determining which funds are statutory and which are not. So for the last 4 years or so, our office has had a formal process for documenting the creation of all new funds and accounts. There's a very special form with sign-offs, and it refers to, is this created just because we needed it or because of statute, et cetera, et cetera. Prior to that, however, it was really, really hit and miss. So what we've done so far for this endeavor is we have a list of about 15 funds that we've started having conversations about that we think could potentially be dissolved. LSO has been maintaining or working a similar list, and then we've sort of coordinated those to see where there's crossover or where we can eliminate some, et cetera, et cetera. The issue is many of the older accounts with no balance and no activity, we all agree can most likely be eliminated, but we, the SAO, do not know for sure if those appear in statute or not. And we don't really have the legal skills, the legal research skills to confirm that they aren't. So I think our ask or maybe suggestion, right? And this is in conversations that we've had with LSO is authorizing LSO to help us confirm whether some of these are in statute or not, and then go from there. Like, for example, we've got 15 funds, maybe 5 of those are in statute, and then, they would come to you and have those conversations. Can we eliminate this? But, if we had some help researching some of these, a lot of these can go away without statute. It's just that our office isn't necessarily comfortable killing these funds that we can't confirm 100% don't appear in statute somewhere.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief question. I appreciate the thought process. I agree with it. Just wondering, have you discussed this with the Attorney General's office as well? And perhaps, they could, because I'm thinking usually an executive branch agency would utilize their representative from the AG's office to perform some of these functions. I'm just wondering if that's part of the conversation or not.
Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we haven't pulled the AG's office into this yet, but I think would be very much appropriate as far as, a path forward. And one more note, Mr. Chairman, there's a substantial step in there that we can do, and we are the proper entity to do, and that's confirming with agencies to make sure that these funds can be eliminated, because occasionally on paper, it'll say, okay, this fund hasn't been used in a while. There's no budget. There's no money in it. We think it can be eliminated. LSO doesn't see any problems with it. The agency says, whoa. No, we still need that. And a perfect example, Aaron brought this up. There's a business council account that is $0. It has been forever, but they utilize that fund to receive some old loan payments from ARA funds. So that's an example where on paper, I would say, oh gosh, let's get rid of that. So that's a really critical step that we also have to take, is checking in with the agencies.
Please proceed. Thank you, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, that's all I have as far as a presentation. Like I said, we have a list of about 15 or 16 funds that we've been working with LSO. I think we just need some direction as to how to proceed.
Okay. Any questions from the committee so far on the auditor's presentation? Committee questions? Thank you, Senator Perkins, for joining us. Good to see you, sir. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Auditor, Aaron, probably more directly towards you. I'm just kind of curious, as you mentioned how old some of these accounts may be. ERA funds are really old. I mean, that was 2008. I mean, that's 12, 13, 14 years old. How long do you anticipate like that account or some of these other accounts needing to be open to still continue to receive, for this instance, some of those payments? Do we have some of those that we see in the future stopping and that we can end up closing in the future? Or is this something that you see in perpetuity?
Madam
You wanna
Auditor
take
or Aaron,
stab at
however,
that?
whoever would like to take that question. Introduce yourself too, please, Aaron, when you even though I know the auditor did, but go ahead and introduce yourself for the record.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown, my name is Erin Benskin and I am the accounting manager for this SAO. The Business Council with that ARA money that they received, they were able to create loans for entities, and they will continue to collect on those loans for years. And because of the way the federal guidelines were with the ARA money, it has to go back and be the same color of money as the original ARA funds. So I would have to speak to them as far as maturity dates on any of those loans to know when we would potentially be able to close that fund.
Thank you. Any further questions? Further questions? I guess I have a couple of questions. First, and I'll just use the order of your presentation. In the two statutory sections that you referred to, Title IX sections, is there any clarification you see that would be helpful in is a fund a fund a fund, or any of the authority you have under that 204 section that this committee should be considering to provide you anything additional? So, and if you don't have an answer to that, that's a request to think about if there's something that needs to be adjusted or modified that would help you, give you a reporting place or someone you could go to and say, hey, I don't think this is being used anymore, and start a process or whatever. So is there anything that you know of in those two that at this point you would point to, Madam Auditor?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And not today, although I appreciate the offer and we will take that under consideration. I think this has been aligning the statutes surrounding the creation of funds and the way the accounting system works with creation of funds has been complex. And so I think there may be some opportunity there, but we'd have to really sit down and think about that.
Okay, thank you very much. And my second question is, you talked about 15 funds with no dollars associated or very little dollars associated. Are there funds that are just out there that are stale? i.e. there's a fund with money in it or an account with money in it, program doesn't exist or isn't being utilized, et cetera, where they're just stagnant, stale. I don't know what the right word would be. There's probably a good accounting word, but I don't know what it is. So stranded, isolated, are there funds like that? So 15 with zero potential, but what about something that's just, hanging chads, for lack of a better term?
Mr. Chairman, if you're looking to solve the state's budget crisis with a mystery account full of money, but no. In all seriousness, this list again, and this is not by any means secret. It's just, like I said, a list we've come up with to start. One of these, for example, has 1.6 million in it. So not a whole lot of money, but certainly worth doing something with. So that's one, again, where we would maybe need some help researching where that money should be diverted. I don't think there's a whole lot of funds sitting around with stagnant funds in them. For example, one of these has $1,600 in it that would most likely go back to UW. One has $24,000. One is owed $14. Yeah. But if I come across any, Mr. Chairman, where there is some worthwhile funding in it, I would certainly bring that to the committee's attention.
No, I guess what I was saying, those funds you just talked about are part of the 15.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Committee, any questions? Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman. It sounds like not directly to the Madam Auditor herself, but maybe to the committee. Do we need to make a motion for this? Is that something that we need to do to allow them to work directly with LSO and have LSO move that forward? Or is that just a prerogative of the chairman and have a directive from the chairman?
Thank you, Representative Brown. So Abigail, do you want to give us, at least your thoughts about how to proceed? I think Senator Boner brought up a good point. Certainly the auditor's office has resources through the Attorney General's office, et cetera, that they can marshal if but there's also an interplay between executive and legislative branch about potential changes. So Is this a white paper, a research paper? Is this just a collaboration between the executive and legislative branch? How would you see this playing out? But potentially in preparation for our next meeting and maybe some bill draft preparation. Ms. Bodewins?
Mr. Chairman, when we were speaking with the state auditor, the path we kind of identified was perhaps to research, see what funds they want to research those funds in preparation of a bill draft, what needs to go into a bill and what doesn't, whether that's our office or the Attorney General's office. I believe up to the committee.
Okay, thank you. Senator Boner?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's just a matter of, dividing up workload and, if we get a bill draft going, obviously also is going to work with the auditor's office no matter what. And, conceptually it could be just a directive saying, if there hasn't been activity in an account for X amount of years, go ahead and close it out. And if there happens to be additional statutory requirements to actually get rid of accounts that are in statute, that's something that could be fleshed out during the bill drafting process. Or maybe we, get, as a result of that process, we get to our next meeting and it's already happened and we don't need to do anything, and that'd be even better. But so I just brought up as a matter of managing LSO's time in an adequate manner. I know that, we've definitely had some staffing challenges, but I'm confident that they can get it done if we needed to as well. So I'm pretty agnostic as to the path forward, but I think a bill draft would be a good way of getting the ball rolling.
Good, thank you, Senator. So it looks like to me there's probably going to be a segregation. Some things we're going to find out are statutorily. We do need to take statutory action if we choose to eliminate them. And some things are strictly potentially in the auditors or the executive branch purview to do. So I think identifying those first, and then we'll let you deal with, or the executive branch deal with the stuff that's completely executive branch, and then hopefully a collaborative process with our staff to identify, research both the agencies, as you pointed out, and then any policy perspectives, if there are policy committees, just so this committee knows, we're getting into, when we started going these counts, we're getting into policy areas of other committees. And so there was some suggestions about eliminating some stuff in our next agenda items, certain advisory committees. And I had a discussion with our staff and we just said, we're going to put that off because the Minerals Committee really should be one that should take that first stab at it and say, is this a policy we want to pursue? Not just the Management Audit Committee saying we're just going to get rid of stuff we don't think we need or whatever. So I think so I guess unless there's reservations on the committee, we'll just ask our staff to work with the auditor's office, kind of understand how those accounts flow, where they follow under this executive creation and function or legislative, and then work toward a short list of items. And then I guess it's the committee's prerogative whether when we get that information, which I anticipate will be can be done probably before our next meeting, whether they want the chairman and vice chairman to have the ability just to have a bill draft initiated, and then we can work through those different accounts and those things, or if we want to wait till another meeting and then ask for a bill draft. So that's a question. And probably just so you're aware, we're having one-day meetings basically based on our workload, et cetera. We could have 2 or 3 more meetings this year if there's work to be done, one-day meetings. So we can make this still do meaningful things one-day meetings. So if there's no objection, I'm just going to ask staff to continue to collaborate with the auditor's office, and certainly the executive branch agencies would be involved. And then unless there's a objection to having a bill draft at least begun, we'll do that as it's warranted. Does any members have an objection to the chairman just asking that be initiated? Seeing no objection, that's how we'll proceed. Abigail, does that make sense for you? Madam Auditor, are we okay with that? Now,
Yes.
This is just on the accounts. I'm understanding at this point, there is no statutory Title IX language that you want adjusted at this time. Is that accurate?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, perfect. All right, any further discussion on this item? Welcome, Senator Bouchard. Any further discussion? All right, Madam Auditor, anything else you'd like to bring forth for us today?
Mr. Chairman, I may stick around for one of the bill drafts, but I can testify if needed in due time on that.
Okay, thank you. Madam Auditor, and this is for Abigail too, because I was not paying attention to the time and didn't get to give her a heads up. So at the last meeting, there was some discussion about the CARES money. We just talked about ARA money going even further back, but CARES money. And there may have been a misinterpretation of what a statement that I made about, if you don't know, I thought I was saying, if you don't know the answer, don't worry about answering the question. And some other people take it, don't answer the question. So, but I think at the next meeting for Abigail, what we'd like is for this committee to kind of understand where we are in the CARES Act funding, what's gone out, what's been returned, how that returned money is being handled. And certainly there's a role for this with the governor's office as well, and we'll bring them in as well. And there may be some other things, and the committee members are welcome between now and the next meeting, certainly in the next couple of weeks, to, if there's other specific items or questions that we'd like to get to CARES Act related. As you know, we're 6 months away from the end of the CARES Act expenditure availability based on current congressional action. Who knows what they'll do next? But based on where we know now, we're at 6 months from the end. So knowing where we are in the race and what's happened so far, I think was a request from last time, and I wasn't trying to put it off. But now we'll make it a formal part of our next agenda and try to get an update both from the governor's office and anything that you might add. One of the big components, of course, was the Wyoming Business Council, as they sent out a lot of monies, and some of those monies are being audited and some are flowing back. So I think there's interest in understanding how that process is working as well. So, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, just one other semi-related note that this committee may be interested in. Out on wyopen.gov, we have now created a separate section for ARPA funds because those monies are starting to flow. So when you go and click on, the COVID relief funds, you can now see all of the CARES Act expenditures so far, but then you can also go in and click and see ARPA money, which doesn't consist of a whole lot yet, mainly the pass-through payments to all of the smaller cities and towns, and then also the revenue replacement money that was put over in the Department of Corrections. So anything going out under that 534 million we've received in ARPA is posted next day after it's expended on there. So
Thank you, Madam Auditor, for that update. Does GovWyo, your website, sorry, Wide Open Gov, Wyoming Wide Open, whatever it is, Wide Open Spaces, whatever it is. Does it also, there's no way to account for direct monies, is there? So the first class cities got money directly from the federal government. Other entities got money directly. There is not a tracking mechanism, or is there a tracking mechanism for those funds? Thank you, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, we have seen nothing we have no insight into the money that went straight to the metro cities or the counties. The other 97 entities, all you'll see from our end and all we saw was the checks coming from the Fed and then going straight to them. But they're shown out there.
Thank you. And a second question, follow-up to or extension of that is, some of the monies came to the state and then they require subsequent B11 authority, et cetera, to go to school districts as an example. So does your website track the B11 process or the authorization process that would allow monies to flow? So the example would be education monies came in, they're being held presumably by the state treasurer. There's a process to B11. Part of those monies go to, let's say, the superintendent's office for expenditure. Those would show up as going to them. But if there's monies that are sitting there waiting for a school district, let's say Laramie County #1, they're not collecting any money yet. Are those monies sitting in an account for them, or are they just sitting in the state account? If that makes sense. Are they held or are they shown expended? How are those accounted for on your website? Just so I understand, and maybe the public does too. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so the only thing contemplated on WYOpen is checks going out the door. So if they are sitting with the state but have not yet, if the check has not been cut, they're not going to show up there.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, further questions for Madam Auditor? Well, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Benskin, I'm sorry. Someone online. Senator Perkins, great.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman of Appropriations, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just forwarded to all the members of Management Council the short budget / fiscal update from I believe it was from July 29th. The budget and fiscal does and sends out to appropriations on a regular basis. And it talks about the CARES Act funding allocation, encumbrances and expenditures, and it lists those. Those have been tracked pretty well. And I've just forwarded that email from July 29th to all members of the management committee so that they can look at that. It does answer some of the questions about CARES Act funding that we've been monitoring on joint appropriations. But anyway, like I said, I forwarded that to all members of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, did you send it to Management Council or Management Audit Committee? I want to be clear, who's getting this good information?
You know what? I just sent it to Management Council. Well, I'll go back and send it again to the right.
We thank you, and they will thank you too.
Thank you. You'll get it twice now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll look at it once. I appreciate that. And thank you I know our Joint Appropriations Committee just had a meeting here week 10 days ago, and they're monitoring some of these things, and we appreciate the work they're doing as well. All right, further discussion from the committee on this topic? Very good. Thank you, Madam Auditor. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. So we do have some initial direction. Abigail, anything we need to follow up for that, or we can do it at the end of the day if there's any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think I've got that down.
All right, thank you very much. All right, our next topic of discussion is the Department of Audit, and we have some statutory clarification times, and we have 3 bills. They're drafts 75, 77, and 78, I believe is the final one. It's and we're going to walk through those. So Abigail, I think you're going to do some presentations. Committee, these items have been provided to you and to the public. The one bill was still going through process middle of last week, and so it was provided last week, and it's certainly online as well, I understand now. And so anything before we start on these bills, these were all bill requests that came out of our last meeting. Thank you very much. And it looks like we now have a version 5 of this bill. So just folks on the agenda, it's version 4, but you've just been handed out version 5.
Mr. Chairman, I believe version 5 was in the e-notebook, so this is just.
It is in the e-notebooks.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And I'll point out the specific change. It was a technical that I worked with the Department of Audit on.
thank you. Ms. Bodewins, we're going to ask you, I know you've had some voice challenges and lost your voice for a while. So you don't have to speak loudly if you speak closer to the microphone.
I can do that, Mr. Chairman. Yep.
Thank you. Please proceed, Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to start with the 22 LSO 75. This is the examination of books of certain districts and entities. That's simply the title of 9-1-507. This was intended to be a cleanup bill, to not substantively change what's going on, but rather to clarify some of the language as to which districts this applies to. So you'll see it starting on page 2 is where we start to, it used to formally just say entities described in 16.4.125C. And this was where the Department of Audit had suggested that if we could pull in those districts listed in the 16.12.202, that list, there's 24 of them, it would be easier for them to be able to point to that statute and say, look, special district, you are included in this. The 125C, it encompasses probably most of those districts, but it's not obvious to someone who reads it what districts are included. So most of the amendments are simply to pull in that 16.12.202A. So you'll see the special districts and other entities described in 16.4.125C or specified in 16.12.202A. And that change has been made throughout the statute. Anytime that 16.4.125C was referenced, we added the 16.12.202A. So that's on page 3. The change between the hard copy, that version 4 and version 5 is actually, I believe on page 3. It's not just cities and towns with under 4,000 inhabitants. Actually, all of them do the report to the Department of Audit. So I dropped that out. Page 4, same thing. We're simply pulling in that other statute. Page 5, same, just clean up. One thing that we did do kind of at lines 16 through 18 on page 5 is there was the issue with the Parks County Recreation District. And I'll talk about that on the last page in detail, but I did put in language or any other applicable laws providing for the dissolution of the special district or other entity. So perhaps that the law that was referenced, the 2229-401 doesn't apply as was decided by the Attorney General's office. If there's another dissolution process, they need to follow that. On the last page is where I went into, that question was raised at the last meeting. Why is there a reason that the Parks and Rec District shouldn't be subject to dissolution under that statute? And what I found out was the Attorney General opinion was correct in the end result. That probably didn't apply. You could come to that conclusion. But what it missed was that there are actually recreation districts. That's not a statutory thing. What they are recreation boards of trustees appointed by county commissioners. They're not districts. So on the last page, page 6, you're going to see where we struck recreation districts and are putting in the more technical title of recreation boards of trustees appointed pursuant to 189201. And then we made one more conforming change in 3528-101. There's also there's recreation joint powers boards. That is something that could potentially be clarified because I think these recreation boards of trustees and anyone can enter into a joint powers agreement, but I didn't change that. I went very simple. And just changing what I thought was absolutely necessary.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll take any questions on the bill draft as presented. I think a lot of it is clarifying language and bringing in the 202, is that the right citation? Yeah, the 202A boards for clarification. Representative Brown.
Ms. Bedouins, just a quick question, and this is probably just drafting and Elsa's choice, but when we say other entity, is that how we describe other things when it comes through statute, or would we want to label out public entity? I'm just, as I'm reading this, I feel like there could be red flags being thrown up all over the place, so I'm just kind of curious how LSO came up with that language.
Ms. Bedouins.
Mr. Chairman, I pulled that language directly from 1612-202. So I brought my books up here so I can find it for you. 1612-202 actually uses the term entities. It says this chapter applies to the following entities unless otherwise specified. And they use the term other specified entities. So that's what I used to pull into this statute to reference that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on the bill draft? So what I think we'll probably do, committee, is we'll ask Abigail to walk through all the bills, and then we'll take comment on the bills from the agency and public. And certainly if Auditor Racinas has anything, or anybody else wants to make comment on the bill. So we'll walk through them, but if you have questions immediately on the bill drafts, let's get those out of the way, just for clarification. So anything further on this bill draft? Anything further, Ms. Sherwin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
I just have
Please.
a general question.
Please.
So if an entity is dissolved, is there a process outlined on how the funds that they hold get reverted or transferred?
Abigail, do you want to respond to that, or is it something we need to follow up with later?
Mr. Chairman, because this statute that we're looking at is referencing other dissolution processes, those processes deal with that. And there's actually discretion in the statutes. At least in that 20, let me find it. The 2229-401, that statute, it directs it to the Board of County Commissioners to seek dissolution, but if it's the county commissioners find it's not in the best interest to do that, they don't have to. So there is a completely separate process, and it deals with what happens when something gets dissolved, the money, everything, how it wraps up.
Good question. Thank you. Probably some more follow-up if you want to track that down. And certainly if there's concerns, bring those to the committee. about the dissolution potential process. Anything further? Any questions on this bill draft? All right. Yes.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Perkins.
thank you. Mr. Chairman, just a question, Abigail. Is there anything that allows, once they've gone to dissolution, is there anything that allows for reinstatement?
Ms. Abigail.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't look into that specifically. I think because it's there's still an out after this 91507 that says you seek dissolution. If the county commissioners don't want to do that, they don't have to. If the district members come forward and say, we really think this is important, this function, if it's water sewer district or whatever type of district, and it still serves a public purpose for what it was created, they still don't have to dissolve. Now, if they do dissolve, I think they can always come back and form a new district, and then they would, it's not a reinstatement though. There's no provision for that. It would be forming the district.
Follow up, Senator Perkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just what occurs to me is almost every other entity, including not-for-profit entities in Wyoming, once they've been established, have the opportunity, if they've been dissolved, whether it's particularly in an event of an administrative dissolution, which in a sense this kind of is, it allows for a reinstatement. The difference between making a new, being reinstated and having to do a completely new entity is there's this, the reinstatement comes back and by its nature provides or basically reinstates it as though it had never been dissolved. So there's a way to undo that. There's a time limit, I believe, generally of 2 years that has to be reinstated with 2 years, or there's no choice other than to create a new entity and do it again. But I'm just wondering if it would be worthwhile for us to consider having a similar type of reinstatement process for special districts or other entities that go through this.
Thank you, Chairman Perkins. Any further discussion? I think we'll maybe let that sit a little bit because that's certainly a new type of approach in this bill, and maybe a separate bill actually that would be required for that particular issue. So I think we'll take it under advisement and we'll come back to it maybe after when we get into the committee discussion on these bills. So committee, any other questions on this particular bill? Seeing none, please proceed to the
Chairman, I
next
do
bill.
have one more question.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Abigail, Mr. Chairman, the other question I have is with regard to if there's an out, the county commissioners don't want to do that. At the end of the day, is this a bit of a gummer, or is this just the appropriate amount? Or I mean, what can you help us understand a little bit about that process if the county commissioners don't do that? And maybe that's what this next bill talks about. The private citizen can bring, has some leverage too if the next bill passes. But I'm just interested, Abigail, if you delved into that or had any ideas or thoughts about that as you did this work.
Thank you. Abigail, any thoughts on Senator Perkins' question?
Mr. Chairman, on page 5 of the bill, the existing language is the county commissioners shall seek to dissolve the special district or the entity in accordance with the 2229 or 401 or any other applicable laws. They don't have to do it. It's not a you shall dissolve the district. It's a you shall seek. And if I don't have 2229 401 in front of me, but I believe it's if they find that it's not in the public purpose, if it doesn't benefit the public purpose to dissolve, they don't have to.
Okay, thank you. I see Senator's got out his green book, so we've got a double team on this. I think for the time being, we'll proceed with the next bill, the explanation of the next bill, and that is draft 77 fiscal training and enforcement of fiscal reporting laws. Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to start on page 2 for this one of 22 LSO 77. This is version 5.
Garbage.
So there are two kind of parts to this bill as we put in. One is the more enforcement terms of enforcement in terms of withholding state dollars from these entities. And so that's kind of in the first piece here. The new language, which we would be adding to 91507, is all state agencies and boards shall require any recipient of grants or funds as a condition of receiving the grants or funds to be in compliance with the reporting requirement under A7, which is the general reporting requirement we've been looking at in 91507. I did put a staff comment because this is just a reporting requirement. It's not, we're not looking at the, if you want them to do the audit, this doesn't apply. There are other mechanisms. The Department of Audit can actually go out and contract for the audit to have it completed and then bill the entity. So that's the front end. They can't get money until they turn in the report, but then how do we work that within the state? So that's kind of the second piece here, starting on page 3. So the director of the Department of Audit certifies already to this county treasurer in terms of the state or the county dollars that get dispersed. This would be certifying to the state auditor of each year any special districts and other entities that are described the same language, 16.4.125C or specified in the 16.12.202A that have failed to comply with the paragraph A7 of this section. The Department of Audit further certifies to the state auditor when a special district then comes into compliance. So once the state auditor receives that certification, they notify the state agencies. I did not specify how they want to do that. I left that up to Madam State Auditor. But they would notify the state agencies that they need to not disperse any funds until they are further notified that the entity has come into compliance. And so in page 4 then is kind of when we start into the training requirement. So this has the department, which is the Department of Audit, shall promulgate rules establishing minimum training requirements. And this is for public officers who are directly responsible for handling the accounts of the office. So they review, and then they will on the back end review training programs and maintain a list of approved training programs for public officers, again, who are responsible for the handling of the accounts. The new language further then says that all these public officers shall attend a training approved by the department within 1 year of assuming office. The department can waive this requirement if there are no approved trainings or on either a virtual format or within the state, or we added if it's cost prohibitive. If the very last bit on page 5 then is if they fail to attend a training approved by the department within 1 year of assuming office, the director may request those in authority to remove that public officer. Again, it's a request. It's not a you shall remove. So there is discretion there. One staff comment I put in was that the Department of Audit and their rules currently define this officer. And I included that in terms of their definition is the chief administrative officer of a state institution or state agency, an elected or appointed member of a public board or commission, the city manager, mayor, or council member of an incorporated city or town, or the treasurer of the special district or chairman of the official board. That's what the department currently has. There is not a definition right now in the Department of Audit statutes that define who we're talking about in terms of who this training requirement is going to apply to. And that's something I want to put before the committee if they want to put something in statute, and then also defer the Department of Audit of what that definition perhaps should be to capture the intended audience. Finally, I think one important section is an uncodified section here on page 6. This requirement would not go into effect until after July 1, 2023. This would give the Department of Audit time to get the rules promulgated, get trainings approved and certified, and then it would apply to those assuming office after that date. So it built in some kind of flexibility in terms of, next July 1, everybody needs to now have a year of training.
Thank you very much. All right, members, any questions for Ms. Bodewins on this bill draft 77? Hands up. Representative Gray, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on page 6. Did you say you want to do it page by page? Oh,
We'll start with page 6.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Ms. Bodowin, so I want to be, does this paragraph apply to officers that may be in place on July 1st, 2023 and have been in place, say, for any period of time, like 10 years, 15 years? Would the training requirement apply to them? Because I read this as incoming officers assuming office. So if someone's continuing a current term and they haven't received the training, is that not going to apply to them?
Ms. Bodowitz, please.
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct. At least if it's someone who's simply hired, not elected, yeah, that would be correct.
Thank you. Representative Brown, did you have something? I saw your hand move at one point, so
Yeah, Mr.
Representative
Chairman,
Brown.
thank you. I'm guessing this is probably already covered elsewhere, but this is just showing me being naive right here. So going back to page 5, if I could. We talk about if any public officer willfully neglects or refuses to handle his accounts in the manner required or fails to attend the training, the director may request those an authority to remove the public officer. I'm guessing somewhere else in statute, we have the authority for criminal charges to be filed if that's the case as well. I just want to make sure that's, since it's not in the bill draft, that we have that covered as well.
Ms. Bodowitz.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I think I might have that statute in front of me. If I can pull it here. So 91510, we're adding a new, we're kind of amending and then adding some new language, but I'm trying to see. I think that's it. Actually, no. Well, I'm not going to give you the number because I'm not sure what, oh, there it is. It's 91508. It's prohibited acts. Any person commits a felony punishable by a fine of not less than $1,000. There's more language there. They refuse to make a required return, refuse to give or obstructs access to information required by the director, willfully hinders. That's all. If you have to really have that, show the intent to willfully violate the law, and that's the penalties there. This would be more if they don't, just simply don't forget or don't remember to file it. Now, there's probably an argument to be made that if you're reminded to file it and then you refuse to file it, perhaps you would come under that statute, but this would be something that's not, you don't have to prove that intent. It's more of an administrative remedy versus criminal.
Thank you. Further questions on the bill draft? Further questions? So I guess two things jumped out at me on this, and this is the state with the language that bring the state auditor into this, and there are some other dates. So there's numerous dates between this and some of the other bills about when something becomes, when they should report by, when they get their first notice, when they, and the different reporting dates. I think there's 3 dates. I've got them circled in another draft. So I think that's something we ought to pay attention to, because the October 5th date that this bill draft contemplates is in another bill draft, November 30th, as okay, you really didn't do what you were supposed to. So is there I just want to make sure if we move forward with these bills, we align the dates that make sense for both communication between the Department of Audit and and the auditor's office, if they're going to be responsible basically for withholding funds from both agencies and other entities. The other thing that I find actually kind of interesting is that the director may request those in authority to remove a public officer. That's the number 5. And a lot of times those are elected officials. So here we have an executive branch, and there's actually some of that going on. We're working with that right now in the state of Wyoming, in one of our counties where a public officer is being, there's concern about a public officer's acts, and that requires the governor to be involved, actually. And make some determinations. So without a guilty verdict, by the way, without actually a resolution of criminal charges. So anyway, so I think that one I think it's existing statute. So I'm not suggesting but it's interesting in light of an executive branch appointee saying we're going to remove a public officer, some of them who may be elected officials. So anyway, any further discussion or questions on that? I don't see Chairman Perkins anymore, but we go back to gallery view on that, please, because I really don't want to look at myself.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we are in gallery view.
We've
Everyone
just lost
has
the rest
their
of the
video
gallery.
off.
We've just lost everybody. Representative Gray had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the staff comment on page 5, this definition of an officer, we've talked about this concept of having a training really since, I've been on management audit, which is, that's my 3rd year. And, I definitely think the intent is to include the board members, but also at least a portion of the staff. And so my concern is whether this really does that. I mean, most, and it's too bad the special districts have kind of withdrawn from attending. They haven't been at these last few meetings, but I think it just depends. But a lot of them will have 1 or 2 staff members. Some of them have none. And it's the board that does everything. But I mean, I'm just not sure when you look at the staff comment, it says that an officer is the chief administrative officer of a state institution or state agency. So might that include the lead and the staff? The rest, I think, are mostly board members, which is fine. The treasurer of the special district is probably going to be a board member or a chairman of the official board. But I'm just not sure this is really keying in any staff at a special district. So what do you think?
Ms. Bodwin, so I think what the staff comment is saying is, do we want to be more prescriptive in statute about who should be receiving the training? But that's the way I interpret. They're giving us that option, so we can be more prescriptive. But Ms. Bodwin, if you want to respond to Representative Gray's query, that would be great.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, that's exactly the purpose of the staff comment, is identified this as perhaps an area you want to flesh out a little more and not rely on an administrative rules to specify who needs to attend these trainings. I didn't put the content into the bill though, because I need more direction from the committee of where you want to go with this, and perhaps direction from the Department of Audit of who needs to be included.
Mr. Chairman.
Gray, if you want to follow up.
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Chairman. I mean, I interpret the staff comment a little different. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think you're just laying out the rule, which is, and so I'm asking a question, does this rule, and maybe it's a question for the Department of Audit, is the chief administrative officer of a state institution or state agency probably the lead staff person within the office? Because I don't know the answer to that. I think the rest are board members. And that first designation, is that a staff member in the office? That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll get the department up there. So make a note of that, department folks, please. And Madam Auditor, if you have comments on it later, we can take those comments as well. All right, further questions on this particular bill? Further questions, comments on this particular bill from the committee, and then we'll go to public comment. Ms. Sherwood.
Chairman Barlow, just a similar question. So here on page 4, it talks about withholding state grants or funds until the state agency or board receives clarification that the entity is in compliance. So what happens to those funds if the entity does not come into compliance or dissolves?
Ms. Bodwin.
Mr. Chairman, that I do not have an answer for.
The first unanswerable question of the day. Thank you, Ms. Sherwood. We'll look into that some more.
Mr. Chairman?
Probably some answers. Oh, yeah, it gets turned over to JAC and they do with what they wish. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman Perkins.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, and if the state auditor's there, she may have some information on that, but ultimately, if it can be dispersed, it's going to be held by the dispersing office, whether that's a state treasurer or or other entity, but it's going to be held by that office in suspense. And so it's one of those, I think right now we're going to find it's a gap that we need to deal with in some regard. Some of that stuff will just revert by the nature of the grant or the fund. But I think generally what you have is a prohibition against, if I read that right, it's a prohibition against disbursement. And in some cases, that's going to be tax monies that's been collected from special district or fees from special districts that's under their own taxing authority. So it's a very interesting question that the good representative from Laramie asks.
Thank you. And I'm glad that your canine companion is in good spirits, treading behind you. on your screen. I see a tail wagging.
She watches like a hawk.
Yeah. Ms. Bodewins, please.
Mr. Chairman, I've thought about it a little more. I do think, my experience, I'm very experienced with how water development grants work. And those are in a bill and they're appropriated. And there's language in the bill that says if the money's unexpended, it reverts back at the end of whatever the term is. And those situations, which I know this was looking at state grants, and in that fact sheet we provided last year, there were substantial water development dollars going. Those would sit in the water development counts until they reverted back. So there's at least one example. I do know what would happen.
Thank you very much. All right, further questions on this bill draft? We'll proceed to the next bill draft, and then we're going to get our list of our attending experts to come up and walk through any questions that they may have heard as we go. So, Ms. Bodewins, if we'll go on to, with no further questions from the committee, we'll go on to the final bill draft in this little cadre of bills.
Mr. Chairman, one more
Please.
follow up on that line of question, if I may.
Please.
Or Abigail, and I think in talking about a special improvement service district or other district that raises revenue from its electors or other property owners, whatever that may be in there, I'm wondering, instead of all we're doing is preventing disbursement, ultimately it is. If I guess what happens is they're dissolved, I think that their power to assess and levy and collect those taxes, is taken care of. But in the event that you end up kind of in no man's land betwixt and between where the county commission has not dissolved it, yet they can't disperse, but yet the tax authority continues to collect the assessments or whatever's happening in that special district. Is it appropriate to suspend the ability to collect that, or have you given that any thought about how that may work under those circumstances where you're actually imposing or you're collecting? You still have a collecting authority, but you can't have any disbursement authority.
Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I think one clarification is this is nothing we're doing is touching the money they're raising themselves. We're only controlling the entities that might control the funding for the district. Whether that, that we certify to the county treasurer that they don't make disbursements, that's already in statute. This would be adding any state dollars that might be going out from the state directly would be held as well. If they're receiving their tax revenues directly and holding those, and they can still keep expending them. There's nothing in statute right now that's saying they themselves can't expend their money.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but I think in many instances, in the case of special districts, in particular, your county assessor and county treasurer are assessing and collecting those taxes, and I think doesn't this create a prohibition of dispersing those from those county collects, so that again, you've got a collection agent. What happens is this stuff will just end up being held in the county commissioner's office or the county treasurer's office, excuse me. And I see Senator Guru now is awake, but anyway, he as a former county commissioner, he may have some insight on this as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So I do think that this is expanding maybe by the potential scope of the discussion to other funds, et cetera. And that's completely appropriate if the committee wants to pursue that. It certainly will require our staff to do more work and understanding of the various components of the statute. So Senator Bouchard, question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I look at all of this as it comes together, it looks really simplistic to me. What we're doing is we're saying you have so much time to comply after you assume office. And if you don't comply, these are the things that take place. So it looks to me like it's the stick. Either you're going to do this or this is what happens. I don't think it's as broad as some of the things that we're worrying about here. And since we haven't really went too deep into how we would do anything with the funds anyway. It's just part of the stick. So that's how I'm reading this. Could you verify that with me?
Ms. Bodens, if you'd like to, please respond if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, this is definitely trying to put in enforcement mechanisms into this statute. And then whether you call it a carrot or stick for the training, it's a carrot up front, but then there's a stick, I guess, on the back end. It doesn't get into all the nitty gritty details of what districts are doing with their money and all of that. And so that, if the committee wants to go down that road,
That's a long road potentially. And I think that was the point. I think Senator Bouchard's assessment is accurate. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And some of the good comments that are being made about, are we getting to the right people, which was Representative Gray's point. Senator Perkins saying, are we dealing with all the monies and all of the authorities? I think those are additional questions that are relative questions. How far does this committee, how expansive does this committee want to be in that discussion? A follow-up, Senator Bouchard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I think that we could look at this and try to fix every little thing that we could think of. But I think we could also do that the following session. I mean, I think we've come a long way with this, even looking at this issue, because it wasn't in existence. And so, and it is the problem where we have people that make decisions that get elected or even, or they're in office. So I think we have to look at this in a point of, do we just get to a starting point and move on? Or do we try to nitpick it to death? So, I mean, I'm comfortable with what I see here so far. There are CFOs and there are business managers or different people that do things. I think that would be the only thing, is make sure that the business manager, if that's the person doing that role, because you have seen that somebody with a business manager classification in state government usually takes that role a lot of times. So that would be the only other thing I would say. If there's a CFO and a business manager, maybe they would be included, but I don't think we have to go down the road of everybody that's in the office or even expand on that. The buck's going to have to stop somewhere. It should be with the people that actually deal with it. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Further discussion on this bill draft, further discussion, and we will, like I said, we will take public comment after we've kind of walked through all three bill drafts. Invite the Department of Audit, certainly the state auditors in the room, and anybody else. And there was some thoughts, Representative Gray referred to the special districts folks aren't here. They are actually planning on testifying. They're going to be joining us via Zoom. I think there are maybe 6 people that have indicated they're going to provide comments. So just so the public doesn't think that the room is empty, there are folks in this room physically, and then we also have the virtual option as well, and folks are intending to participate in that manner. So Ms. Bodewins, I think we can move on from that bill, and we'll go to draft 78. Version 3 is the version, at least the version I have before me. That seems to be accurate. So if you'll proceed with that.
Mr. Chairman, this is the citizen suit bill. So what this does is we looked at kind of those 3 other states, and they all did it slightly different. So what I did for this one is it's a mandamus action. Wyoming has mandamus statutes. They're from 1886. They're very, very old. But because that we have those statutes, we're going to use that mechanism. I can't speak to how well it works, but that's what we have. We haven't studied the mandamus statutes yet. So we would refer these cases to be conducted under those statutes. And so if one of these entities, and you see that same language, the 16.4.125C are specified in 16.12.202A, fail to comply with the mandatory reporting requirement contained in the 507A7, any taxpayer residing within the boundaries of the non-compliant county, city, town, special district, or other entity may institute a mandamus action, and that's pursuant to those 1886 statutes. If a judgment is given in favor of the taxpayer instituting the action, whereas the court finds that, yes, you had a mandatory duty, then the taxpayer can receive attorney fees, and then the mandamus statutes already give the taxpayer costs. So this would be giving them attorney fees as well. One staff comment I put in here is that each of the states we looked at that had this citizen action, they did it slightly different in terms of Arizona authorizes the court to award costs and attorney fees. Montana required the court to award costs and attorney fees. And then Nebraska actually made the officers individually liable. So it wouldn't be the district who's paying that. It'd be the person who didn't file the report, which is an interesting take. That's different than the other states. So, and I know a question was raised at the last meeting regarding, is anybody using these in those other states? And so Carla Smith went ahead and called up some of the states, and she can report that if you would like that information.
So first, any questions on the bill draft itself, and then we'll get some supporting information from Carla. Any questions on the bill draft itself? Vice Chairman Boner.
Yeah, it'd be helpful for me as, at least as a non-lawyer, to just go in a little bit more detail as what mandamus means, how does that work? You mentioned it's very old, but maybe just a little bit more detail would be helpful.
I think it's a sea creature, isn't it? Oh, that's a manatee. I'm sorry. It's a battleship. No. So yeah, if you want to just explain the 1886, I think was the
Yes.
year, and mandamus just for us non-attorneys. But
Mr. Chairman, it's funny you say that because as a lawyer, I had to take a crash course in what a mandamus action is. It's not something I've ever had to work with. But basically, it's an action when you don't have any other administrative remedies or other remedies at law, you can file to compel a governmental entity typically to compel them to complete a non-discretionary ministerial task. And so what this statute is doing is authorizing standing to bring those suits. Generally, as a taxpayer, you can't just go bring lawsuits because you pay taxes, but this would be authorizing this particular type of suit to compel the filing of the report. It has to be a ministerial thing that it's non-discretionary. So, I mean, the statute's pretty clear. You shall file a report. And so you would bring this action then to tell the court to go tell the public officer that, yes, please file. Here's a court order, file the report.
okay, thank you. Yep, please, Senator Boner.
And any examples of recent use of this, I guess, legal mechanism in the state?
So in this state, but I think Ms. Carla has some updates from other states. Should we just go there to that?
Mr. Chairman, this I've seen when I looked at kind of the annotations in case law for mandamus actions, water commissioners they use this action to compel the water commissioner to give you so much water. I didn't look at to whether those were appropriate uses of that. I don't remember how the cases came out, but I know this action was used in terms of filing those. But a lot of the case law comes down to whether it's a non-discretionary act and then whether it's something, if there's no other remedy, like if we were to start putting other remedies in statute to where here's what the Department of Audit does in terms of you didn't file your report, then you couldn't bring a mandamus action. You can only use this if you've exhausted everything else.
Thank you. Senator Bouchard, question?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just kind of have a statement because I mean, I know that a writ of mandamus and how that works. I know that it's mostly used in federal court a lot. I don't know whether it's used in local courts as much, but to give the committee an example, the previous auditor actually, there was, remember when we were doing they were trying to access what the checkbook was in, what was in the checkbook. And there were two entities on the outside that agreed with the state auditor that they would give her, I think it was $7,500. I mean, I may be off on that figure, but what happened is they said, well, you pay us $7,500 and we'll give you the data. Well, they started slow walking the data out. So it was taking so long. So basically what happened is they did a writ of mandamus with the court saying that you told us you would do this and now you won't perform. So we're asking the court for relief to make them do it. So, I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's what I know about it. So I think that should be helpful.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm going to go with Senator Boner right here. His mic is on, and then we'll go to Senator Perkins. Senator Boner.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure I just said that little bit of information is helpful, just to, it gives me space to know that it is something that is in fact used. And I get nervous when you start talking about, references to territorial days. Just want to make sure it's something that as a non-lawyer, that our judicial system is well versed in, and I'm sure that they are, but it's good to hear.
All right. Thank you very much. Senator Perkins.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just harken back to my law school days and just as further explanation, Mr. Chairman, a writ of mandamus is the order from the court that comes back. So Senator Bouchard is exactly right. It's It's the order. The writ is the order issued from the court. If you want to think about it, just recently there was an example of an injunction against the federal government for against its stay on leasing, federal leasing on both onshore and offshore federal leasing of oil and gas coal leases. If you think about it, mandamus is just the opposite of an injunction. And an injunction is the court issues that order that enjoins or stops someone from doing this. A writ of mandamus or mandamus action is just the opposite. It's an order that orders the government or the body, or in this case, an officer, to do something that they're clearly obligated to do. That's all I'd have to add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And it's good to know that those stone tablets that you had when you were in law school still come in handy. So we thank you for your counsel. Appreciate it. So I think Ms. Smith is with us now, Ms. Carla, and if you would kind of give us a rundown on what the research you found, how this may be being used in other states. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. This will be pretty quick because there wasn't a whole lot to find. These actions are rather new. If you remember, this was from the October 2020 report that we did on the audit enforcements, where there, as Abby stated, the 3 states, Arizona, Montana, and Nebraska had these kinds of actions. So I followed up, if you remember, in Arizona, the failure to provide the information in a timely manner may result in the Attorney General filing a court petition to compel the political subdivision to comply. And they call it injunctive relief there, but it is the inverse of the stopping. It's the mandamus to make, to compel them to go forward with a special action proceeding. And then the taxpayers residing in the district, the Board of Supervisors, or their county treasurer may petition the court to show cause why the district did not submit the required audit and financial information. So I contacted the Auditor General there and they said, oh, no, we haven't dealt with this. Talked to the director of the County Supervisors Association, and that director offered to do a survey of their counties. And of the 15 that he surveyed, there were only 5 responses, but none of the responses indicated that they had the need to go forward with this. And he said that basically they report that they received the audits they should receive, and taxpayers have not petitioned for an audit or financial reviews of the districts. He also indicated that they have several exemptions to the statute that I cited for this. And he wanted to make sure that we were aware of some of the intricacies or nuances with that. So that the number of special districts that fall under this law are reduced. Some of the exemptions are that the county improvement districts, of which he said there are many, they report directly to the Board of Supervisors. And so because they're overseen in that realm, that there's probably, they don't fall under this, but they have that level of oversight. He also said that also there are other boards of supervisors, the Board of Supervisors also directly oversees flood, health, jail, park maintenance, and TV districts. Yes, they do have a TV district. And the audits are conducted along with county financial reporting. He said that the biggest entity that this legislation covers are the fire districts. And they have quite a few of those. And he said, but they also fall under another regulation that requires them to present the results of the audit to the district board in a public meeting. So they can't just have it. They have to have it and present it. And they're also required now to publish their budget and expenditures on their websites. And he said, so that's created a lot more transparency for them. Then the next state was Montana. And with that one, if the entity, if within 2 years of the applicable deadline, residents, taxpayers in the district may bring a private cause of action against the local government entity for failure to comply with the local government's fiduciary requirements. And Montana has, they said that nobody has met the 2-year requirement yet. And they had also put kind of like a hold on that because they were trying to work out in their statutes, a rule or a corrective action plan where they would detail exactly what steps they would do to bring these people back into these entities, back into compliance. And they just finished that and it just passed. So nobody has met that 2-year failure to report or failure to comply aspect yet. But they do have on their website, they have a form that says application for review of claim against a local government entity. And in this form, it cites the laws. And then it tells, then you have to check a box to show that you are, that you meet the requirements to file, that you have jurisdiction. You know, I pay property taxes, I'm an elected officer in the local taxing jurisdiction. You know, that's one of them you can do, or I reside within the jurisdictional boundaries. And then you can only submit one claim per form, but they have several options. You can file claim against adoption by resolution of a county, city, or town budget. You can file claim against the submission of a county, city, town annual operating budget, the Department of Audit, or against the annual financial report, or about the completion or submission of a local audit or financial review, or a resolution of a significant audit finding. So they allow these kinds of actions to be filed a claim against. So they're set up for when their entities really do hit that 2-year mark. The final one, if I may, is the Nebraska. And if you recall, they just passed their legislation last session that allowed action against mandamus action against the municipal authorities that require the municipality to proceed to have an audit conducted. Now, they currently just now passed additional legislation that they believe will help with the stick aspect by requiring any entity that is late past the due date to pay a $20 per day fine, late fee as they call it, up to a total of $2,000. And that $2,000 will go towards trying to make them into their enforcement efforts against the entity. So they haven't reached that window yet where they have any eligible claims. So basically none of the states have used this aspect yet, but they're all still working towards finding workable solutions for enforcement. And at that point, I'll take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So at $20 a day, up to 2,000, you could not comply for 2,000 or for 1,000 days or 100 days. Anyway, do the math, but there's still a timeline and there's a maximum. So folks could just say, I'm not going to comply, period, and pay the fine and not do it. Sounds, at least in Nebraska. All right. Any questions on any of that from Ms. Carla? Any questions? Thank you, Carla, for following up on those things. We appreciate that. Senator Grew, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Further questions, further discussions on this bill draft, questions from the committee, questions from the committee. I guess my question is the term taxpayer. Taxpayer could be any tax. I mean, is that any tax or is that tax specific to, does that specify they have to pay a tax specific to the district or entity that they are asking for the information from? So, you know, and so anyway, so is there any thought on that? I mean, maybe you use that term because it's used elsewhere in statute, but my question is, I'm a taxpayer, but I'm not part of a particular improvement district. I would have no standing in that, or would I have standing? And how do you, who makes the determination of whether you're a taxpayer? I assume it's the court, but Ms. Bodewins, any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's probably a great area that needs to be fleshed out to say it says taxpayer of the specific district. To have standing to bring that action. So you're not, you might, I think you'd almost have to be with it. If you're within the bounds of the district, you probably are a taxpayer just by generally how the districts are set up. People that live within the boundaries pay the tax. But if there was someone where perhaps it was a fee-based district and you aren't actually using the services or paying the fee, but I don't know. So it might be something worth clarifying.
Thank you. So my question is, if you're trying to compel, let's say, and I'm not saying anybody's doing this, a district that receives a mill levy, but you're not a property owner, so therefore you're not paying any mill levy as a taxpayer. You may be paying rent to a taxpayer, et cetera. Does this give you, this term using taxpayer, give you standing to bring this action?
I think
I think it's a rhetorical question. I'm not saying you have to answer it. I don't know.
no, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a rhetorical question because it is ambiguous and probably should be clarified to be whatever the committee's intent is. But I do agree with you that it's not clear.
Okay, thank you. Further questions from the committee? Representative Gray, this was your bill draft request and there's no questions. It's a perfect bill draft, apparently. All right, thank you. So we'll now, I think we'll open it up for, see, I knew I could get him to come forth. I knew we could draw him out. He's a shy guy.
Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Chairman.
Miss Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this Nebraska statute that's referred to in the staff comment, do you have that? I guess you're saying Arizona is in line and Montana is in line with what we're trying to do here, but I'm just curious. I would like to see that language. Do you have it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I have it in my office. I can get that sent out. I could probably
be
find
great.
it online, but
Provide that. I think that there's also an interesting question when I saw that and heard Ms. Smith's testimony. We also have a government immunity clause in the Wyoming too. So there would have to be an interaction with that as well. Because as you're acting in an official capacity, you enjoy some level of immunity by statute and maybe even constitutionally. So anyway, but so there's an interaction with current statute that have to be distressed in that. Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, I think with the personally liable, that we would definitely want to look into how that interplays with the Governmental Immunities Act.
Okay, thank you very much. Further questions from the committee on this bill draft? Thank you very much, Abigail, for walking us through those bill drafts. So now we're going to take public comment. And as tradition, I'll certainly give our electeds who are here, if they have any comment on any of these bill drafts. And so Auditor Racinas, that is you, if you would like to make any comments on any of these items, please, as you do so, refer to the bill or the bill draft number or something, so we make sure we're all on the same bill. And if you think there's interactions between the different bills that give you pause as well, because there are some interactions, I believe, that need to be kept in mind, please point those out. So, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I just have some very, very brief comments on 22 LSO 77. So the fiscal training and enforcement of financial reporting laws. I don't have any comments or concerns on the purpose or the interaction with my office in the bill. And in fact, in all honesty, I'm coming at a few of these questions from my former position as a CFO, just for your consideration. So on page 2, line 13, it says that, starting on line 12, all state agencies and boards shall require any recipient of grants or funds. And so I guess my question or my concern would be that that may create a lot of confusion for entities that receive state monies that are not public entities. There may be like, we give money to a lot of non-public entities. So I think that might be a good opportunity for some clarification there. And then, Mr. Chairman, my only other comment refers to page 4, line 6. And so this is the direction that state agencies or boards shall not disperse or continue to disperse any state grants or funds. Now, the bad news is I don't have a perfect solution or suggestion, but any clarification there, I think would be very, very welcome to agencies. For example, sometimes agency A will get federal funds and give them to another agency. And I at that point, are they still federal funds? Because they're only recorded federal funds once in the accounting system, and then they become state funds. I think that little piece right there just could get a bit muddy. So any further direction as to what your intent is divvying up state funds from other funds, I think would be very much appreciated.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. So to me, state applies to both grants and funds in that sentence on line 6 of that page. What you're saying is you think funds without the qualifier of state there should be more clarification there, or am I misunderstanding? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think where there could be confusion is not so much that it says grants and funds, just what qualifies as state funds versus what doesn't.
Okay.
Clear as mud?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I had.
Any questions for the auditor? So these are questions for the auditor on her comments on these bills. Yes. Representative James, or Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Auditor Racines, so you said that we give a lot of money to non-public entities. And I was wondering if you might be able to give some examples and how that doesn't violate Article 16, Section 7.
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, so there are, payments to any IT vendors, payments to any nonprofits, payments to any Medicaid providers, payments to essentially anything that's not a government would be someone who does not have to comply with that statute that's referred to in the Department of Audit requirements.
Okay.
Ms. Bodwin, did you have something you want to interject? And please pull your microphone close.
Mr. Chairman, just Senator James, the constitutional requirement is it has to be, if there's an exchange in consideration, basically, we can give money to private entities as long as the state's receiving something. So State Auditor Racines would be talking about payments because the state has received something in return. It wouldn't be grants, I guess, is probably the clarification.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator James. Any other questions for the state auditor on her comments, on her suggestions and comments? Questions from the committee? All right. Thank you, Madam Auditor. We appreciate your suggestions. I'll say now we have Department of Audit. We have 3 bills before us, and we welcome you. And I see the insurance commissioner is here as well, so maybe he wants to comment on these bills too. No, he refuses profusely to. He's not here. He's for something else. So welcome to our Department of Audit friends. Please introduce yourselves and proceed. And as you give comments, please refer us, general comments certainly, but if there's specific comments to bills, refer us to which bill you're speaking of. Thank you. Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Justin Chavis, Public Funds Administrator for the Department of Audit. I have with me Rich Cummings. He's our audit manager for our state and local government audit section. Just a couple of comments to follow up on Representative Gray's questions on what would constitute a public officer on the training bill. So typically what we see for local governments, the chief administrative officer that is directly responsible for handling the accounts would be the clerk treasurer. I think that part of it would be pretty clear for us. I think what would be less clear with our definition of a public officer includes the oversight body, but with the bill language saying those directly responsible for handling the accounts, I think it would be less clear that it would apply to those. And I think Representative Gray would be right in that we'd want to include both the oversight body and the staff. I think a lot of times the root cause of some of our audit findings is a lack of oversight by that governing body. And then particularly when you start getting into the frauds that we assist on, almost always there was a lack of oversight that allowed that to happen. And it could be that the governing body didn't know that they needed to provide oversight. It could be they didn't know what oversight or how to provide it. And we've even had a couple instances where they've essentially been talked out of providing the oversight. So I think some clarity there might be beneficial as to who exactly the training would apply to. And then some follow-up on some of the enforcement on the non-compliance. Typically, our experience has been that when any funds are withheld, that pretty quickly gets entities into compliance. So with the conversation about, withholding distributions, altering or pausing the authority to collect, usually we see if you withhold funds, they come into compliance pretty quickly. So I think that's all the comments we have, unless you have any other questions.
Thank you. So a follow-up on the first comment you made regarding the officer issue, who would be responsible? You have authority now, and this bill, of course, extends greater authority for training requirements, et cetera, to promulgate rules that you could write into the rules who those responsible parties are. So I think the question is, and the question posed by Ms. Bodewins in the staff comment is, do you want the legislature to be more prescriptive about who should be included in the training? Or do you think there's a place for giving some latitude to the department? And maybe there's a combination. We say at least the principal, and you say and others identified by the department, and then the department can say, well, we need these few more or additionals. So any thoughts on that? Because I don't want us to do something prescriptive and then actually not serve the ultimate purpose. And of course, we have reservations about just giving free license as well. So any thoughts on, how we can strike that balance of providing good direction, but also giving you some latitude? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chavez.
I think we'd be comfortable either way through rules or through statute. My comment was going to be, it would depend on your comfort level with us promulgating it through rules, but I think we'd be comfortable either way.
Representative Gray? Just one microphone.
Yeah.
We can't take you in stereo. Mono is enough. Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just figuring out which one I want to use. So, in this question of an officer, you talk about local governments. I think you were maybe referring more to cities and towns. The situation where you have a special district, okay? I think it is important to cue in the staff, if there is staff. Do you think that definition does this? Because it probably interacts already with a lot of the other statutes, this officer definition, right? Because it's there. So would it include someone in the staff if a special district has the staff, in your opinion, this chief administrative officer of a state institution or state agency?
Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I think it would if they're handling the accounts of the special district. I would think it would cover them.
Thank you. So the alternate was, if we put something in statute, said the responsible entity, i.e. the entire board, and those that they appoint for specific duties for fiscal responsibility. So we could actually, as a legislature, say the entity has to be somewhat trained, and so does the person that they designate as their CFO or whatever, treasurer or whatever. Is that an approach or am I getting too far in the weeds?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would work.
All right, thank you. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just be kind of curious, and I don't think anybody in this room, maybe when we hear from the special districts themselves, might have some understanding of this, but I'd be kind of curious as to how many of these special districts actually have that level of staff. I know a lot of them work on a mostly a volunteer basis and maybe have a few hours to give, but to Representative Gray's comments, I mean, if you've got somebody who's not elected and not considered the chief person in the agency, but they dedicate a few hours, but they're writing the checks. I think they certainly need to be covered underneath this and certainly need to have that type of information. But maybe when we hear from the special districts themselves, I'm kind of hard pressed to think of there's every single special district in the state has a certain staff person that this would qualify for beyond the chief person that's named. So.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Gray, another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have one other question. So the training itself, I'm trying to remember, I think we talked about this at the last meeting. So I think you said there's already something posted online that would satisfy this requirement. How long is it? Is there something posted online? I know you guys said maybe you do some in-person stuff and that was suspended because of COVID. Can you remind us what's in place currently that would meet this requirement in state?
Mr.
Mr.
Chavez,
Chairman.
please proceed.
Representative Gray, I think a lot of the associations, if you will, provide training and then will ask us to come present at those trainings. So conservation districts, weed and pests. So we'll attend those and provide training. As far as what those associations might have up on their websites available, I'm not sure. On our website, we have an instructional video for submitting budgets that are required to come to us. Say that's probably a half an hour-ish video. But most of it, I think when we provide training is we're being asked by the different special district groups to come provide training.
Representative Gray, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I mean, I think this is important, but I guess then I was mistaken. So right now there isn't something virtually that would satisfy this requirement. Because I mean, what I do think in the world we're living in, you know, it might be good to have that virtual component. And, you know, if this is suddenly a requirement and you're being asked to attend X number of events suddenly, are you going to come back saying we need more staff? And maybe that's something we need to talk about. But I mean, I just personally, I think in the world we're living in, you know, maybe you can record a video and post it, and that rather than, and you could go too if it fits into your time requirements. But I think it would be good to have something online that fits this so that the special districts don't come back and say, we're not able to meet this. And you don't come back and say, you know, we're not able to staff this. So what do you think on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I think we could do an instructional video in terms of the census reports that have to come to us, the follow-up paperwork, just like we have for our budget video. I don't think we wouldn't require any additional staff to do that. I think that would be something we could do fairly easily.
Okay, thank you. Further questions for Mr. Chavez, Mr. Cummings on any further comments on any of these bills? No? All right. Further questions from the committee? Looking to Senator Guru, he's quiet. Senator Perkins is giving his dog a treat. Anything else? Oh, see, the dog showed up right there, right on cue, right in the doorway. All right. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate you being here. All right. So now we will, any other agencies, I've already eliminated the Department of Insurance. They do not want to testify. Someone behind the pillar over here, and I can't tell who it is or if they're testifying for, all right. What's that? Oh. If you would like to testify to any of these three bills, that would be great. Come forth and introduce yourselves. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. No? All right. So now we're going to go to public comment on any of these three bills that are before us. Again, we're in the Department of Audit 9 o'clock item. It has 75, 77, and 78, three bills that were bill drafts. And so Amanda, who would we start with? Is Miss Lanta
Mr.
available?
Chairman, she is in the room currently.
All right, if you'll just let folks who are interested, if they'll raise their hands for the administrator, we'll let them in the room. We'll get a participant list up and then we'll start through those that are participating remotely. We welcome you and thank you for joining us.
Mr. Chairman, her mic is on, but her video is not.
Miss Lanta, do you have some video you could join us with? Do you have audio you can join us with?
Yes, sir.
So do you have a video feed or is that not going to be possible today? Are you on phone?
I'm not on the phone, but again, having some connection problems, but I will try to resolve that as we're talking.
Yes, so welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for providing us some materials this earlier this week on some information. That's appreciated. So please provide any testimony you'd like specific to the drafts before us or in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the bill draft 75, considering the serious fallout of not complying, I do believe that on page 4 and 5, if we could add notice going to the special districts, I think it's incredibly important that the district that's going to have the entities that are going to have the impact receive the same notice as the counties and the commissioners.
So I just want to be clear. So on page 4, you're talking about the Department of Audit shall certify to the Board of Commissioners and to the special district. So I think that is, they are being notified in that certification, but maybe I'm not understanding if there's something further you would like, Ms. Lanta.
Yes, sir. At the bottom of page 4, for instance, it's the very last line, the director of the Department of Audit shall file notice with county commissioners, the treasurer and the county clerk. I believe that same notice should go to.
Okay. I appreciate that. I think we're talking about 2 different dates. One is the October date. This goes to that. And the second date seems to be the November 30th date. And that does not indicate that they would get it there. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that helpful suggestion. Anything further that needs to be added into that section or that bill, Ms. Lanta?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In addition, I wanted to comment. I agree with Senator Perkins about some method of reinstatement in the unlikely event that an error has occurred. For instance, the paperwork has been received, the district has certified return receipt or something like that, and for whatever reason, they're showing on the list as being non-compliant. I think it's reasonable to have a remedy for reinstatement, and to his point about a method that avoids any kind of disruption of service to the users of the district.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. That's on the 75. Anything further on 75?
Yes, back on page 4, where it starts the process of filing notice that districts are not in compliance. I think there is some confusion created by not only the statutory dates that are set out, but for instance, on the actual report the Department Audit does on non-reporting districts, it says any of the entities listed below with a date reported prior to December 31st will be considered compliant. So I guess what I would request is that the consequences don't kick in until after December 30th. Because even by the department's own, I guess it's a rule, you're compliant if you've done it by December 30th.
So I want to be
Thank you, Mr.
clear,
Chair.
that's on, I just want to be clear, Ms. Lanta, that you're referring to page 4, line 5 of the bill, that
I'm sorry, no, on page 5.
on page 5. Okay, my apologies. On page
Right.
5, December 3rd. Okay, line 13, 14. I got you. Thank you. So non-compliance takes place. Okay, thank you. All right,
And-
members of the, anything further, Ms. Lanta?
Not on this draft, sir.
All right, so let's just, any questions for Ms. Lanta on this particular bill draft from the committee? From the committee on this particular bill draft? I see none, so we'll proceed to the next bill draft you'd like to comment on, Ms. Lanta?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of my concerns about this bill it comes in the,
Which bill, please, Ms.
I'm
Lanta?
sorry, I'm moving on to 77.
Okay, thank you.
So when the action occurs on this, it talks about those in authority. Well, out of the special districts, there are 678 special districts. There are 482 that have elected officials. I guess I'm like some clarification on the directly responsible on page 4, the officer directly responsible, particularly as it comes in with elected officials. In terms of the body corporate, does that mean the whole board, or does that mean the treasurer specifically? And if it means the treasurer specifically, I believe that should be spelled out in the statute to make it really clear for all
Okay,
districts.
so just for the committee and the rest of the public's sake, we're talking about page 4, page 4, line 18, public officers directly responsible. And I think this kind of goes to some discussion we had earlier with the state auditor, with the Department of Audit and Representative Gray about who are we trying to get, who are we trying to get involved in this? So I thank you for that.
Yes, sir. And then it's the very last line about may request those in authority. And again, I think with any type of legislation that has the ability to remove a trustee, whether elected or not, of a special district, I guess I'm asking for a little, maybe more specificity in that language.
Sure, I appreciate that. Understanding that is current law. We are not proposing that part of the law. That is existing law in.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, but we do, I certainly flagged it for me as well. So I do appreciate that thought. Anything further on this bill draft?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, not from me.
Committee members, any questions for Ms. Lanta on this bill draft? Seeing none, final bill draft, Ms. Lanta, any comments there?
Yes, sir. On the bill draft of 78, my concern comes from towards the end of the line. There is a remedy for the taxpayer to recover fees and costs. I would propose that there is also a remedy that if judgment fails on this, that the special district would have the same remedy. My concern stems from perhaps some elements of cottage industry being springing up on suing special districts on this. And I guess further on the whole issue of the reporting, I go back to the body corporate and the number of whether it's one particular trustee or the entire board. If it's an entire board, there are 3,400 total trustees or directors, whatever you want to call them, of the districts. So certainly that starts to expand the number of parties on it. In this specific bill, they're suing the board. But I had failed to mention that earlier. But on this specific bill, I do believe a similar remedy, if judgment is not found, would be appropriate in the case of some kind of error.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. So committee members, any questions for Ms. Lanta on this particular bill and her comments? Representative Bouchard, or Senator Bouchard, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I got a specific question here. We're talking about the ramifications of what happens if someone doesn't comply with reporting and a citizen actually takes action and for whatever reason fails in the court. Because remember, the base of this is there was a failure on the part of there was a failure of reporting. So how would we come back? Because that's the trigger point. The trigger point is that it's not that that person is just suing arbitrarily. It's a specific action. So why would we want to come back and get attorney fees against a citizen? I think the basic easiest way to comply is to comply with the filing report. I mean, that's what this whole thing is. It's a carrot and the stick again. So I would give a little pushback there. So I'm just really trying to clarify how that suggestion would even come up.
Ms. Lanta, if you would care to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Bouchard. Again, I agree with you, sir. The easiest way to do is to get the report filed. I just have concern that if that trigger has been pulled and it turns out that the district has complied, the district who has a responsibility to the taxpayers is going to have to expend money in defense of it. And I would recommend, I guess, exploring whether or not there needs to be some equaling out on that. And further on the subject of complying, the one note I would make in general about reporting our financial information. In looking back the last 5 years of non-reporting agencies at the end of December of the year, in terms of the special districts that are listed, the commonality is most of them seem to be improvement districts. And remembering a comment that Senator Perkins had made a couple meetings ago about some of the improvement districts are only created at the time a subdivision is being built in order to make sure that services are provided. It seems that from my research, when I was trying to track down the people who had not reported, I couldn't even reach them, which, for instance, like the two in Natrona, and apparently they were already disbanded. And I'm wondering if perhaps this isn't a special districts in general non-reporting issue, but I think maybe there's a quirk particularly involving improvement districts that are created from subdivisions, that perhaps in those creations or in those improvement districts, there could be a some type of a sundowner clause that after it's built and it essentially turns into an HOA, that the district ceases to exist and it creates a HOA or something like that. For there to be such a commonality year to year to year of one particular type of districts, that's what leads me to reflect on the fact it's not a special district problem, it's a particular kind. And in this case, it seems to be a quirk of the nature of the type of special districts. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lanta. So Ms. Bodwins, you had a comment, and then we'll go. We have several questions from the committee. So Ms. Bodwins.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the awarding of fees. I wanted to provide some clarification that you're not seeing. In those 1886 mandamus statutes, they already award costs to the
Oh.
prevailing party. But so I specified in this one that the taxpayer could also receive attorney fees, which is kind of since 1886 been separated out as something different. If you don't want the prevailing party to receive costs, then we want to change that in this as well, or go the either way. But I just want to let you know what's in that 1886 statute that you're not seeing in front of you currently.
So to be clear, Ms. Bodwins, what you think Ms. Lanta's concern about having the costs going both ways is already covered in Title I. Is that accurate?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. What doesn't go both ways currently as this bill is written is the attorney fees.
Okay, thank you. And are attorneys' fees not costs? Maybe that's a rhetorical question. Sorry, Senator Perkins. Ms. Bodwins?
I believe there's been case law that separated those out as being different.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. Now we'll go to questions from the committee, or let's just stick with questions for Ms. Lanta on her comments on the bill. We'll get to committee bill discussion when we're kind of finished with public comment. So Representative Gray, any questions for Ms.
Mr.
Lanta?
Chairman, thank you. Just pushing back a little bit on that. This one thing that was said in the past, I mean, and I'll end this with a would you agree? So it is a question. I mean, I just think that typically the way these statutes are constructed, you award attorney's fees to the petitioner if they win. And the reason, I mean, this situation that Ms. Lanta, this potential hypothetical where someone might file something and the entity has already filed their deal. I mean, first of all, I think the attorney would probably be sanctioned. I mean, it would be very poor research or just flat out false statements. And I think, there's the ability to reprimand the petitioner anyway and award that if in these egregious circumstances. But if for some reason, it wasn't just that they had already filed, but for some reason the court came up with some reason that they didn't have to file or decided that they didn't want to move forward, I don't think those costs should be awarded to the defendant. The petitioner should be awarding those costs. So I think this one hypothetical that, what if the entity is already filed and some attorney just frivolously filed a mandamus action? I mean, I think there's a lot of sanctions, including the potential awarding of attorney's fees, but to specifically award it in all circumstances to the prevailing party, I would think there's a reason why typically in these statutes they don't do that, and why we shouldn't. So anyway, would you agree?
So Ms. Lanta, if you choose to respond, but to be clear, Title I already gives costs both ways based on Ms. Bodwin's. So yeah, so anyway, so just to be clear, we're already partway through that with current statute. So, all right. Ms. Lanta, if you want to respond, if you want to take more comments or questions from the committee, we can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will leave it, up to better minds than mine as you guys continue working on the bill draft. I am heartened to know that the cost part is already covered. And like I said, my only concern is, I absolutely support compliance. My issue isn't whether or not we need to comply, which is why I also offered up the observation that it seems to be the major part of the non-reporting seems to reside in one type of special district, and perhaps a look could be made on their enabling and creation statutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lanta. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To that broader point about, improvement districts or water districts, just point out for this committee's sake and for Ms. Lanta's sake that we are considering now on the corporations committee as well. There's actually a very controversial situation in the middle part of our state dealing with how exactly you dissolve a water district, I believe it is. And so that's a very complex issue that certainly touches on this compliance issue. If in fact those districts become defunct at some point, there doesn't seem to be smooth mechanism in our statutes to actually get rid of one. And it's come to the point in Charlotte County at least where it can be quite controversial when there's a push to get rid of an improvement district that's been taken within municipal boundaries and the district refuses to go quietly. And so I just point out that's part of a broader discussion I'd recommend leaving to the corporations committee because it is fairly complex, but certainly it does affect, you're correct in pointing out that it does affect what we're considering here as well. So no question there, Mr. Chairman, but I thought since it was just brought up, it was important to point that out.
Oh, a little bit of a turf war here, I see, Senator Boner. A little bit of a turf war. All right, well, we do appreciate the Corporations Committee, and since you're on the Corporations Committee, you'll keep us apprised of how this may interact on the, with their work. So any further questions for Ms. Lanta? All right, we have other, Ms. Lanta, thank you very much. We do appreciate it. Certainly, as we continue to work these bills and you have specific language suggestions, you gave us some ideas for amendments, but if there's specific language adjustments you think need to be made, we certainly look forward to those. Who else is on the phone, Amanda, for public comment on this or on video or phone or voice or
Chairman?
video? Yes, ma'am.
No one else has their hand raised at the moment. We have a few for the next topic.
Okay, so if anybody in the public, on the virtual public would like to comment, please make sure you are indicating to us that you would like to comment. I'll give you just a moment to get that done. Anybody else in the room wish to comment further? Mr. Chavez, you have something further to offer to the committee on this, and when Mr. Chavez is done, if there's no further comment and we don't have any indication online, then we'll close public comment. So Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some additional clarification on dates, because what was focused on was December 31st. And so that date is the marker for dissolution. And that's also the statutory required date for us to provide our cost reports to the legislature. But dates well before that is when entities are not in compliance. So for example, census reports are due September 30. So if you have not provided your census report by September 30, you're not in compliance. So say if it's October and we get a call from state lands that says, hey, before we distribute this grant money, is this entity in compliance? If they haven't provided their census report by then, we would say they're not in compliance. So that money would be withheld until they were. There's different, so September 30 is the first date. Same thing with follow-up paperwork. That's October 31st. So if you haven't had your follow-up in by October 31st, then we would say you're not compliant. And then statute says as of November 30th, any entity that's not compliant, the county treasurer has to withhold funds. So although, and maybe it's a change in wording that we need to have on our cost report in terms of compliance and reporting, that 12/31 date is only, we include entities who have reported by then in that cost report. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're compliant with the statutory deadlines in terms of September 30, October 31, November 30. And so our goal would be for the enforcement action to be early enough to compel reporting so that we can get all the entities included in our cost report so we have good numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Any questions for Mr. Chavez on that? I just want to be clear. You think that, I just want to be clear, all the dates that you provided, and I referenced them earlier, October 30, I think there's another one in October, but September 30th, October 31st, November 30th, and then subsequently December 31st in monthly sequences. Those are all statutory deadlines or statutory dates that you believe are a compliant point in some respect. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, yes, September 30th is statutory, November 30th is statutory, December 31st is statutory. October 31st is by department rule for follow-up paperwork.
Okay, all right. And do you believe that the specificity of non-compliance is that we're clear enough about not when noncompliance occurs. As you know, there was a little bit of a misunderstanding up here, or at least with me, about when noncompliance actually occurred. Do you think the statute needs to be clarified that noncompliance is September 30th?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it needs to be clarified, but if an entity that's distributing funds contacts us and says, is this entity compliant with your reporting requirements? That would be based off of the September 30 date for census reports, October 31 for follow-up paperwork.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any questions, Mr. Chavez, from the committee? Questions? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So is there any further comment on any of these bill drafts from the public? Amanda, you have someone that raised their hand?
Mr. Chairman, we do. We have a Miss Angela. If she would just turn on her video and mic.
Angela, welcome. Please introduce yourself and welcome to our committee. We see you. We see your yellow hand and we don't hear you yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for giving me this opportunity to speak on Bill 77. I'm Angela Johnson, representing Wyoming Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers. And I just wanted to take a little bit of your time to let you know that we're interested in taking a seat at the table to help shape the direction of the training and education requirements for the public officers. Currently, WAMCAT partners with Casper College. They act as our institute director, and we hold educational institutes 2 a year. And last year we did virtual institutes, and we're going to continue to do quarterly virtual institutes throughout this year and hopefully have an in-person training at Casper College in September. Some of the certifications that we currently have are cash handling, internal controls, fraud prevention and detection, budgeting, grant and loan management and reporting, with a potential training on how to write a fraud prevention policy. So we have some educational components in place at this point in time. We also contract with the Association of Public Treasurers of the United States and Canada and the International Institute of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers, which give us specific training for clerks and treasurers. And, these trainings could also branch out and help along with special districts, elected officials, county clerks and county treasurers, county commissioners, whatever it may be. We also think that the enforcement component of the bills, that if we communicated with the entities that are already enforcing the enforcement, such as county commissioners, the city council, state auditors, Department of Audit, and the associations like WAMCAT and WAM and so on, these people could help possibly communicate with the non-compliant entities and help them along the way, hold them in compliance, but also help them get the training so that they understand when they need to report or what they are faced with. Also, as far as enforcement, I guess make them accountable for what is needed. The other part that we've talked about as our WAMCAT board is making sure that we're all at the same table and we're all helping each other, partnering with the education and training component. And one last thing, the best leadership class 2013.
Well, thank you for the last thing. Well, thank you, Ms. Johnson. We do appreciate it. I actually do appreciate that your organization has taken this on and feels strongly about it. Can you tell me how many members of the association there are and how many fiscal officers that would entail? Meaning how many municipalities there are, and then how many fiscal officers you envision within that structure?
We have, I believe, 96 municipalities involved, and it depends on if they have their clerk clerk, clerk treasurer, or treasurer, all three of them, or their city administrators, part of our association. So with that being said, we have an opportunity for everyone to receive specific training, especially if it's treasurer training that these bills cover.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your collaboration with the Casper College. I think that's who you are working with for your training. Any members, any questions for Ms. Johnson? Any questions for Ms. Johnson? Just a final question for me then. I didn't see anything from the committee. So my assumption is that you do work closely with the Department of Audit and feel like most of what you're offering would be consistent with what they feel is also their obligation to ensure compliance with. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, I would say yes, that would be an accurate statement. It might be that we need to communicate a little bit better and figure out a pathway if we need to help with some of the non-compliant entities as far as communicating and helping them understand the importance of reporting, and also providing the education that they may need if they're either new to the position or not aware of what the requirements are.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We appreciate your time this morning. Committee questions? All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. I see we've been joined by someone else, and I can't read the name on the screen, so.
Mr.
Ben,
Chairman,
go ahead.
I think he is on for the next topic, but he can let us know if he would like to testify on this one.
Everybody's on hold for the next topic. This is important. Mr. Moritz, did you want to comment on these bills at all?
Mr. Chairman, no, I did not. I am, in fact, for the next agenda item.
All right. Thank you very much. Great to have you with us. All right, committee, any further discussion on these bills? So committee, I think we probably have maybe two options before us. We can certainly, I'll close public comment unless I see anybody moving to the microphone or Amanda tells me there's somebody raising their hand. So for today, we're going to close public comment on these three bills. So committee, I think we have a choice between us, among us right now. I think there's been several amendments suggested for some of these bills that I think have some validity, at least for two of the bills, have some validity. So we can certainly work the bills at this meeting, or we can carry them over to the next meeting. And our intention at the next meeting will be to work the bills. I mean, we can give a brief public comment. We can certainly take amendments and ask people to, if they're bringing amendments to the bills, and we can do that. So it's the committee's pleasure, if you'd like to carry these over, to work the bills and finalize bills and vote on them for potential introduction at the next meeting, or if you want to go through them today. So, and I'm not trying to put it off. I just think that there were several issues brought up that some people may need more time with to formulate amendments. So is there a sense from the committee? You want to, if someone wants to make a motion to, move a bill for sponsorship at this point, we can do that. But I'm certainly open to just carrying them over to the next meeting and working them at the next meeting. Is there any objection to that approach? Vice Chairman Boner.
No, Mr. Chairman, but I think that's a good approach. And just point out that one of the bills wasn't available to the public until relatively late in the process. So for that reason, I think it might be a good idea just to get some written amendments maybe. So once again, maybe that could be up on our website before our next meeting. So we have more opportunity for public input. And as we look at some good points that were brought up here today in terms of the technical aspects of the bill and what, if any, we need to do to make sure that the bill's ready, that we put a good product forward for our colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. Any other comments from the committee? So sensing that there's no strong objection to carrying these bills over for the next meeting, Abigail will certainly solicit, it'd be my intention that we solicit written amendments from folks. Ms. Lanta had several, and I would certainly invite her and anyone else that has, and certainly members of the committee, if they'd like to contact members of the committee directly, or if they'd like to bring them to the committee, submit them to LSO as a process or as part of the process. Is that acceptable for you, Ms. Bodewins?
Mr. Chairman, that would be great.
All right, thank you. So committee, any further discussion on these bills? I thank you for your work. I thank you for the suggestions on these ideas and bills. We know there's a couple of rabbit trails, and I don't say that meaning they're minimal, trying to minimize the issues, but I think Senator Perkins and several of you brought up some issues that we may want to take additional steps on. So these bills, and then maybe there's some additional steps that we take with other bills. One may be being taken up in our corporations committee on the improvement districts, and then some other things. So at this point, I think even though I know we're running a little bit behind, we'll just take a 10-minute break. Let's say, let's reconvene at 11:05. So we'll take a 10-minute break, reconvene at 11:05. So we're running about 30 minutes behind, but we will hope to get back on track. We'll reconvene at 11:05. Thank you. You giving up on us? Justin's leaving. No, I'm moving up. I'm actually just moved over to this thing because I don't want to move during the middle. I got a better side. I got a better side. I applied for, I had a representative grade side where blocked off by that pillar was kind of maneuver around that. Oh, he needs lots of camera time. We gotta give him a charge. Yeah. Who are you with? The boxing Steve, and also with K2 Tech. Great. Well, I should. Thank you. Nice. All right, members, we'll come back to order. Thank you very much. So we're at that point in the meeting where we move on to our next topic item, number 4. And this is a single bill draft called repeal of specified boards and commissions. And so with that, our administrator, Ms. Bodewins, will kind of give us the high-level view. And then you'll note, members, there are board bios for each of the potential repeals that Ms. Amanda has put together. And I don't know that we'll walk at length through each of them, but if there's any questions on any of them, just because where we are with time, I think we'll expedite this. And we have the governor's office here with us as well, and some of the executive agency administrators, directors here, commissioners that can answer questions on any specific one. If you have them, then we will proceed with any public comment. So Ms. Bodewins, if you want to initiate the overview of the bill draft, which I think is pretty straightforward, but fire away.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to use the board bios to walk through and start with the Health Benefits Plan Committee. One correction to that is they last met in 2008, which is pretty important distinction from
Would you pull that microphone?
2021. Page 5, you're going to see your conforming amendments for that committee. And then page 15 is the repeal. I'm not going to walk through those conforming amendments. For the Advisory Council on Palliative Care, on page 6 of the bill, you'll see conforming amendments. This is one where you might, I took the least, I made the least amount of amendments. If you want to go further and repeal all of it, that is at the committee's prerogative. So at this point, it was the department and the council was working together. I removed the council. The department is still currently under the statute as written, would still provide the report. And you'll see those on page 6, page 7. Those are kind of what's left in the statute. And then page 15, you'll see the repeal of all the specific council, palliative care council statutes.
Thank you.
Page 8, you'll see conforming amendments for the Governor's Food Safety Council. Those kind of go through page 9, basically just taking them out of all the rulemaking authority for the Department of Ag. Page 15 is the repealer of the substantive Governor's Food Safety Council.
Question on the Food Council
Yeah.
or something so far?
Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Bedouins, just out of curiosity, if we were to go through with this, as it goes through, governor signs it, everything like this, if you look at page 10, it reads, regulate the safety and food network together with the Department of Health to promulgate rules. Would that require the Department of Health to start the promulgation of rules all over, or could they adopt the rules that are currently underneath the Food Safety Council's jurisdiction? As I was looking through this, one of the things that struck me is anybody who has that authority to promulgate rules is now going underneath potentially another subsect. Is this going to require a brand new section of rulemaking authority and drawing this whole process out? Or is there something legally that we could attach to that just allows them to adopt the current rules?
Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I think it's not going to have an impact at all. You're just removing this. Basically, the Governor's Food Safety Council, they were sort of a group of various stakeholders that would get together. And if you look at the minutes, they're very simple. They would just kind of review the rules, check, we're okay with these. It was more of just the Department of Health and the Department of Ag, the Consumer Health Safety Division, they're already doing what they're doing. This was just an extra added step of oversight by this council. So we're just removing that.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on page 11, you're going to see conforming amendments for the State Engineers Groundwater Division Advisory Committees. You'll see quite a bit of highlighting. The committee needs to decide what they want to do because the Groundwater Division Advisory Committees were appointing the members for the control area advisory boards. In the back of the board bio, you'll see language that the State Engineer's Office provided as a suggestion. And then on page 15, you'll see the repeal of the actual committees. Finally, for the Wyoming Public Television Council, on page 15 of the bill, there's simply a repealer. This was the only one that actually had an appropriation attached to it. And so you will see that language in section 4 of the bill on page 15 as well. And then State Employee Compensation Commission is the final one, although it actually appears first in the bill. And on page 2, you're going to see a lot of the conforming amendments to remove that function. And then page 15, you'll see the repealer, and it's E through H. And all of the repealed language, the full text is included in the board bios at the back. So you have that.
Okay. Thank you for that. That is your bill, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, the bill has some highlighted language that Ms. Bodewin's pointed out for in the state engineer, the water advisory boards. So I don't know, Amanda, and I know you did a lot of work for all these different boards and sheets. Does anybody need anything out of those boards or sheets, or do we want to do a summary? I'm not trying to cut you off. I know you did the research and the work. So Ms. Bowden, do you want Amanda to walk through those real quickly, or do you think the committee, if they have questions about them, ask questions now, and after that we just go to public comment, the governor's office, and then go from there? What's your thought?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's up to the committee, really. The information, most of it's on that cover sheet. If you have questions beyond that, what's in the minutes and all of that, I mean, we're not going to have responses for that. That was simply provided so you could take a look and see, well, are they rubber stamping? Are they doing substantive work? When's the last time they met? So I think it's if the committee has questions.
Okay. So I think in the sake of time, I think we'll forego walking through each one, and we certainly appreciate the information. I think it was supposed to be instructive to us and instructive to the different stakeholders about, are they doing things? Is it meaningful? And if they're not, how do we change that? Or if they are, then we're not pointing it out. So I think we'll forego that. Does anybody have any specific questions about any of these particular boards before we go from our staff, both the drafter of the bill and the provider of all the supporting documentation? Any questions for them from our committee? Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. All right, thank you very much. So now I'll invite, I guess, Ms. Anderson would be first to come forth and give any perspective from the governor's office. And then we can, and how she would like to proceed with different agencies, or if she just wants to make a statement on behalf of all the agencies. And then if the committee has questions on specific ones, we can take it that way. So welcome, Ms. Anderson. I'm glad you're here. Just a reminder to the committee and the public, some of this is an outgrowth of the Efficiency Commission, which Chairman Perkins was on. It's further taken up by Governor Gordon's office, with Ms. Anderson being the lead on this and suggesting where we could maybe reduce the size and scope of government. And so we thank you for your suggestions, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Betsy Anderson. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and General Counsel for Governor Gordon. I don't have a lot to add. I want to thank the committee for looking at taking action on these particular matters. Really appreciate LSO, your staff. I mean, I think they did a huge amount of work on going through this. They made sure, and I followed up to make sure that there is somebody should be present to represent each of these agencies or these particular boards and councils. If you have specific questions about the impact to them, or if you have any particular specific details you'd like, they're certainly here. And I do want to thank all the directors, because they're the ones we reached out to. And I think I said before, when we met before, they provided very thoughtful responses about ways to create some efficiencies. So with that, I can stand for any questions or let you ask the particular board members their information.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Anderson? Council Anderson, any questions? I guess you're off the hook relatively easy so far.
So far.
So far. We've got still part of the part of this half of the day and the remainder of the day, the second half to go. So thank you very much. All right, committee, any questions, Ms. Anderson? All right. So committee, I mean, we can call up every specific item and have the relative executive branch folks who may be here speak to them. Amanda, who do we have? Do we have anybody on public comment for these that have indicated they want to provide public comment on any of these?
Mr. Chairman, we do have individuals from the boards. If they raise their hand, if they want to provide any testimony.
All right, so I guess I'll go maybe the other way. If there's any of the members, I see the insurance commissioner, the water, the state engineer, et cetera, Ms. Bach here, and I see folks online too. Some of them I can't read their titles. I guess PBS is the one I do recognize anyway. With the truck in the background, I recognize it's probably PBS. So is anybody from representing any of the agencies that are responsible for any of these respective advisory committees, compensation commissions, et cetera, want to provide testimony to the bill draft before us? And I'll start with online. I see two folks online, one from PBS, and I can't read the name on the other one. So would either of you like to provide public testimony to the bill draft, the respective portion of the bill draft that you're interested in? All right, go ahead. Mr. Moritz, yes, you were on earlier. Great, welcome back. Go ahead and let us know maybe which pages of the bill or which entity you're providing comment on, or if it's general comment, and then proceed. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Ben Moritz. I am Deputy Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. And I am here because Wyoming PBS is the state funding for them passes through the Community College Commission as part of our overall budgetary process. Wyoming Public Television is housed at Central Wyoming College and receives oversight by the CWC District Board of Trustees. As was mentioned earlier, the governor's office reached out to look at efficiencies. We were asked several questions. We worked with General Manager Dugas to compile that information, and our recommendation was to discontinue the Wyoming Public Television Council. So we are in support of this particular bill and don't have a lot more to add. Just wanted to explain why we were here. And if General Manager Dugas has additional information to provide, I'd be happy to turn it over to him or answer additional questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moritz. Mr. Dugas, do you have anything you want to add to the Wyoming PBS discussion in that portion of the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of time, I will forego my extensive prepared remarks and merely answer any questions that the committee members might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee members, so we've got anybody else online or in the room that wants to speak to the Wyoming PBS? We'll just try to get that one taken care of while we have two folks speaking to that. Committee members, so I see nobody else raising their hand or indicating they want to speak to this portion of the bill. Committee members have any questions on this portion of the bill? Committee members, questions on this portion of the bill? All right. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us and for providing comments. I see one more person online, and I'm sorry, I cannot read the name from where I'm at. So please unmute and introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lisa Oswald. I'm the Senior Administrator of the Wyoming Department of Health Aging Division. And I am I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm working in Basin at the Wyoming Retirement Center this week, but I'm just here to answer any questions regarding the Palliative Care Advisory Council if there's any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oswald. And I apologize, I didn't recognize you.
That's okay.
It must be that fresh air up in Basin. You look refreshed up there. There's sunshine in your background and everything. So nice to see you. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Oswald, who is in the Division of Aging with the Department of Health? I believe that's her administrator for that. Any questions for Ms. Oswald on the Palliative Care Advisory Board? Any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. All right, in the room now, anybody else online, Amanda? That's indicating they want to visit about anything?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's it online.
Thank you. All right, in the room, any questions, anybody have anything they want to offer up on any of these? Ms. Bach, good morning, Director. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Patricia Bach. I'm the Director of A&I. I wanted to just do a quick discussion on the Comp Commission because some of our reasoning for getting rid of it is because we now have we being A&I now has management audit as our home committee. So some of what the Comp Commission recommended for the governor might fall on management audit. And that's kind of how we see it, is that if we could have a home committee for the Comp Commission discussions, the same discussions we would have with the Comp Commission, this committee would be much more informed on state compensation than twice a year with rotating senators and representatives coming into the Comp Commission. So what happens is we get new members sometimes every 2 years, sometimes every year. Sometimes some of the members don't even know that they're on the Comp Commission because it is an advisory role. So one of the reasons we thought with getting rid of the Compensation Commission is that management audit will be better informed than maybe the commission would have been to discuss the compensation and possibly have recommendations for the governor. That's all the commission did, was recommend. So they would recommend to the governor and to management, the management council. In this case, I wanted to make sure that you understood our reasoning, putting maybe a little bit more on management audit because of our home committee. So I just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit. So that's where the knowledge base would lie, my opinion would lie. And I think that the management audit committee would have a better understanding of compensation than the rotating members on a comp commission that met maybe once a year or twice a year. A lot of what the comp commission does, and the main role that's happened in the last 4 years, is the housing allowance. So we have a lot of discussion about the housing allowance. That's one of the roles that the commission really has focused on in the last couple of years. So that housing allowance is, as I think you know, specifically Teton County. Right now, that's the only county that gets a housing allowance. So that's kind of an example of what we work on.
Thank you, Director. So my question is, you mentioned interacting with the management council. My assumption that you're also making a recommendation to the governor based on for budget, for his budget development. And you're also, in that you're interacting with the Joint Appropriations Committee on. So I guess my question is, if we're taking a role, I'm a little cautious about Article 2 of our Constitution. Everybody stays in their own lane. And so if this committee is then asked to give recommendations to the executive branch about compensation, then the executive branch is going to come back to the legislature for then appropriation or authority. I just want to make sure we've thought about, what really the role of this committee would be in that, because it's the first time I've heard of this type of heard this thing, so I haven't maybe thought through it enough. But I just want to understand what role you think this is playing. I think it's already a role you're doing. You're already doing this and using the commission as your sounding board. That would be I just want to make sure I understand, but that is a pre-budget issue. And then when you develop a budget, then you take it to the governor and the governor decides how he wants to proceed, makes a recommendation. So I'm not saying we need to flesh it out all right now. I just want to continue to have a thought process about how management audit actually as a legislative committee fits into that process as a executive advisory committee. It's different than a home committee where we're taking up statutory issues and et cetera. So any thoughts or feedback on that?
Chairman Barlow, I do think that's a valid question. And when I say advisory, and it is something that the commission members, the representative and the senator, take that recommendation to management council, and also to the governor. But essentially, you're right, it's an executive branch decision on the budget. However, we talk extensively at the JAC about compensation, and that's where it's kind of a dual role. When we did not have a home committee, we kind of thought of JAC as our home committee because that's who we were in front of all the time, and we still kind of do. So I think whatever way we work this out, I think that JAC, the governor, and this committee, if they so chose to hear what we had to say about compensation so that you understood what we were doing with state compensation. We talk enough about it to multiple committees and the governor's office that I don't think the actual commission is all that. And I want to be careful because I don't want to say they're not helpful, because they are. It's just that it's redundant, and we're speaking to you about state compensation. We're talking to JAC, we're talking to the governor. The only one we're not talking to is management council. That was the role of the representatives on the commission. So in my head, in my mind, maybe that's something that JAC or management audit could do with the management council.
Thank you, Director. And just to that point, and I think when management council, and this has been, I think, 2 years ago, kind of directed that there be a home committee for A&I, it was a policy home committee, meaning, let's take the example you used about the housing issue. If there's a statutory authority needing for housing adjustments or whatever, this committee might take that up. The funding side would be left to JAC. So there was kind of we knew there was going to be a shared responsibility. I just didn't want to start stepping on, this committee. I just want to be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about the policy type stuff, home committee. I think that makes sense. I think that's where we can provide, you the avenue to say, we're talking about the money here. We need some policy adjustment here. To me, that makes some sense. So Representative Brown had a question first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Director. Curiosity, we talk a lot about right now about the discussion of bringing compensation, forward and what that kind of looks like as far as raises or something like that. But a big role of the commission, when I was an employee of the executive branch, was also taking up employee concerns about compensation issues. Specifically, I took a certain time off and wasn't paid or something not completely handled correctly. Dissolving this commission puts that solely in the hands of you guys now in the Department of Administration and Information. I show a little hesitancy to that, not necessarily directly with you or anything like that, but I have some concerns with that, with employees not having a non-biased board. I feel like sometimes I certainly have heard it from constituents in my district that have gone through that process. They even feel like going to the commission, it feels like this, that their mind is already made up and there's nothing going to change. But they at least have an unbiased voice. When it goes forward, they can voice that concern to this type of commission. So dissolving this board, what do you envision that looking like in the future when an employee has a compensation issue moving forward? How do you envision them bringing that forward to you and your group?
Thank you, Chairman Barlow. Thank you.
Thank you. So members, this is where really understanding what that employment commission does is so important, and whether we're losing something that is a vital role. So Director, if you certainly welcome to speak directly. Obviously, we have a nice fact sheet that Amanda put together for us. If you think there's something that needs to be added to it, or you think there's a missing component, certainly let us know that as well. But please proceed with any response you have for Representative Brown.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown, absolutely. And it is quickly addressed in the staff comment. I think they did a wonderful job with all of the commissions, with the LSO, and I appreciate that. There are two sides of that question. First one is compensation specifically. We get a lot of complaints about the pay tables. We get complaints about movement of the pay tables, raises, cost of living adjustments. That's one area that we get a lot of questions about for the comp commission and HRD in general, because a lot of people don't go to the comp commission, they come directly to HRD. Then there's what I think you alluded to, the personnel side. I didn't get paid overtime, or I had time off to do my job in the legislature and I wasn't paid properly. So there's two separate things. The first is the main issue for the comp commission, is the actual pay for state employees. That is something that can be taken care of through an all employee meetings with HRD, which is what we intend to do, which is open to the public, which will be available for people to come in and talk about compensation, employees to come in and talk about compensation, directors to come in and voice their concerns about compensation. So that is how we look to work with those who have issues with compensation if they don't have the compensation commission. So that's one area. The second area, we have always in HRD, the HRD administrator's job is to run this commission and to answer questions via the commission. It's all written. So there is a written document going back to the person on compensation. So all of that, none of that would change. It would change who they're talking to. If they're talking to a group of folks in HRD, along with a couple directors, Robin Cooley, who has been a very integral part of the comp commission. And that position is very helpful with the comp commission. So we envision it to be very similar, twice a year, to have employee meetings to bring those and other issues forward. So that's how we envision fixing that issue if we don't have the comp commission.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions for the director? Further questions on this potential dissolution of or repeal of the Employment Compensation Commission?
Follow up on
Yep,
that.
please follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still trying to figure out how to formulate it, but the Comp Commission is made up of a larger group of people. It's not just, and I don't want to use the term because it's usually used begrudgingly and negatively, but bureaucrats usually are the ones going to be making this decision now, right? You've got the people that are rank and file that are looking at this, and this policy says X, therefore there is this. An unbiased board like this compensation commission can look at something and say, man, the policy says this, but we totally respect and we totally understand what this employee is saying. This should be taken to the governor for consideration. This should be taken to the director for consideration, and maybe even taken back to the legislative branch to take a look at this if it's something that is either legislatively drawn through statute, or whether or not we need to be looking at something inside of rule when those rules are rewritten, stuff like that. So I guess I understand what you're saying about how it will work.
Mm-hmm.
I have a concern with how that will work, because what you're doing is you're taking the objectivity from an outside source away from this, and you're putting it literally in the hands of, yes, you're going to have a public comment or a public meeting. Yes, you're going to have outside sources, but they're all internal to state government. And I would venture to guess that there's some on this board or this particular committee that look at that and go, I'm not so sure I only want government employees making this decision. Somebody from the outside, when we have these types of issues, how do you reconcile maybe having an outside perspective looking at some of this when I know my time in state government, it's very, very clear when rules say X, you must follow, Y. How do you balance that? What would you do, and how would we look at potentially fixing that issue in the future?
Director.
Thank you, Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown. I think it's a valid concern. I think there were 2 private citizens that were on the board, and don't hold me to that. I'm pretty sure it was 2. And there was also a retiree who would be on that board. So I think that is something that we can adjust to without making another board or commission. And I will say, and I want to make sure it's clear, the Human Resource Division Administrator That's where I was 2 years ago. Has sole authority. So say somebody comes to the meeting, Representative Brown, as a layperson comes to the meeting and says, this policy is not good. This is what I would like to see changed. I could listen to that and be like, well, that's just how the policy is. The HRD administrator does not have to listen to me saying, I think the policy's fine. That person does have an independent, it's not an independent role, but that person has the authority under the statutes, bless you, for looking at those complaints, working with the employee, working with the director of that agency, if that's where the problem lies, to fix that problem. I know that doesn't leave a lot of solace to say, well, it's still a state employee. But HRD's responsibility is to make sure that they are working for both the state employee and for the state of Wyoming, so that they play that role, and that person plays that role well currently. So I don't have as much angst about it, but there are things we can look at to see if we can fix the concern you have, because it's a valid concern. And I think that's something we can look at in the future too, when and if this commission goes away, on how we work that out.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the director? Yes, Ms. Sherwood, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just an observation and thinking about having the tools and resources we need to thrive into the future, and referencing the governor's economic development plan or proposal for Wyoming strategy to survive, drive, and thrive. In there, it identifies a goal of helping state agencies recruit and retrain our workforce. And looking through the State Employee Compensation Commission minutes, it's clearly a theme that we're not keeping up with pay, and that we are falling below market values. And so in thinking about how this is a priority for the governor and moving us into the future, that Wyoming becomes more resilient, who do you think is the champion of this efforts to make sure that we're paying our state employees, a market wage or competitive wage, so that we retain these families and retain this talent?
Ms. Director?
Chairman Barlow, Representative Sherwood, I think it's multiple players involved. I think it's A&I director. I think it's the Human Resource Division Administrator. It's the governor and the legislature. I can sit in front of you and you'll see in October meeting, I've requested a little extra time from Abby for October, because we're going to have quite a bit of information in October on compensation and a lot of other issues. It's my job to bring it to the legislature to say that we're behind. We've done that. It's tough in a year when the budgets are rough. So it's difficult. We talk about it, but it has to be a united voice. We are significantly behind. And so we'll have more of a discussion in October on that, because we'll have a nice little PowerPoint and everything else to show you on exactly where we lie. A good example of that is the Attorney General's office. We are significantly behind in that area, and it is apparent by the amount of people that you're losing at the AG's office. So the champions, I think, are A&I, to make sure everybody knows what the problem is. And then we have to make sure that we budget appropriately so that we can move through that market. And that's where the funding comes in from the legislature. So I think as long as we are giving, it starts with us. And we have to give the right information so that everybody understands what the problem is. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the director? Further questions on the State Employee Compensation Commission potential dissolution? Questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Director. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Any other folks here that want to speak to any of the items in this bill draft? State Engineer's Office is here, and they made some suggestions on actually amendments to be considered by the committee. So I think I will just specifically ask the state engineer to come forth and just give us some brief thoughts and then take any questions. Just so committee knows, certainly we have a chairman of ag here on this committee. We also, as you know, have a select water committee that if we feel like this bill may need some more work from subject matter experts, we could certainly pluck this out of the bill, suggest that it maybe be considered by either the ag committee or the select water committee, or both, in their considerations, and not included in this more omnibus type approach. So with that, please introduce yourself and welcome, and go proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Greg Lanning, your state engineer and the director of the state engineer's office. When the call came out from the governor's office in, well, just last June, are there any boards and committees and commissions that you may want to look at as per the 2017 Alvarez report recommendations? And when I took that back to staff, it came back pretty quickly. We had one, if you would, on the shelf related to this committee that we're speaking to in this bill. That several years ago, we questioned the efficiency and the efficacy of this committee as well, and its purpose. It was stood up back in the, circa the 50s, for instance, when the rest of the groundwater statutes pretty much were enhanced, if you will, and embellished to meet all of our needs at that time. I think you'll find since then that we've evolved a little bit, and this particular committee isn't necessary in our minds. There are three statutes that we reference: 413908. The actual title is a Division Advisory Committee on Underground Water. So that's the committee we're talking about. We've since now called that the Groundwater Advisory Committee, just for your 413909 talks a little bit, and it's referenced also in the bill, the state engineer and the powers generally. And then 41319, 3913 are the control areas. And the control areas are important, and they're very effective and serve a purpose. And I'll describe exactly how the control areas work and how they were tied together. And that's the reason for a lot of the highlighted sections in the bill, for instance, is that the committee and it's tied to the control areas and the control area advisory committees. The committee, back when it was set up, were intended to have one committee for each of the 4 divisions that we have in the state of Wyoming. There's 4 water divisions that we have one superintendent, for instance, for each of those, and that's where the Board of Control and a lot of our surface water regulation occurs as well. They were to supervise the election of the groundwater control area boards, and I'll speak to that a little bit closer. And then generally also advise the Board of Control as well as the state engineer on groundwater, underground water. You'll find in our statement in the packet that we have difficulty attracting boards and finding candidates to put to this committee. It really hasn't been very active. Back in 2002, I was talking to Lisa Lindeman, our groundwater administrator, and she says, Greg, when I came here in 2002, the then state engineer said, hey, get this committee back up and running. She did the best she could to try and find people and populate this particular committee. And then ultimately, we didn't do so well. There were some solutions to combine it with other committees, because we wanted to be represented, certainly. We do want to hear what the public has to say. But even those attempts failed. And the last time we actively met was in 2014. We tried to get together in 2015, and that didn't work very well. And it hasn't been an active committee since. And you say, well, how's representation happened since? And I think we have to keep in mind as water development came into being, and they have a water planning effort as well. And so when they go out and do basin area planning, they make sure that all water users are represented, both surface water and groundwater. So I feel like we have good representation. And then there's a lot of science and geology that goes into the groundwater itself in terms of its availability, et cetera. And so that general representation, I believe, still happens especially through water development in particular. And so that leads me then to the control areas. This committee had the purpose of electing these officials to, or these persons to the Ground Area Control Advisory Boards. And we have one right here in the Laramie County Control Area, and you read a lot about it. And we have certain contested issues. Groundwater in this area has been stressed for a long time. And ultimately an order came out in 2015 regulating groundwater better, but the control area board has been in place for quite a while. So a lot of my work goes into the enforcement of that particular order. And there's some wells up for consideration currently, as a matter of fact, that tend to make the articles as well. So the groundwater advisory boards, there's 3 of them in the state, and they're all in southeast Wyoming. They've happened over the period of decades, 20, 30 years. And they get stood up because there's issues that need to be addressed. And so you get good representation in those areas that need to be addressed, specifically for those control areas. Even though we had the committee and these committee assignments, getting back to these, the Division Advisory Committee on Underground Water, the one that we're looking to eliminate in this case, one of they were charged with setting up the elections for these control area boards. Well, it turns out that staff did most of that work anyhow. And so if indeed we need another control area, I think it would be handled adequately, certainly by staff, just to simply go out, conduct the elections, and make sure the board is staffed. Other groundwater advisory sources, in addition to the control area advisory boards, we recently have also stood up a state board of examining water well drill contractors and water well pump installation contractors. So we have an advisory board that advises us to licensing water well contractors, as well as advising us on water well standards, for instance. And then we have an interagency groundwater committee. That's agency only. I mean, like the DEQ and the AG and us, we all get together on a regular basis as well as agencies to discuss groundwater. That was set up quite a while ago. And then special projects as necessary in water basin planning. Again, we'd probably go back, if we needed a study, for instance, that would go back to probably water development, study a certain area, see what the groundwater issues are. And then there's definitely a public process in the water development project and study process. So that's an overview, and that's why it's highlighted like it is. Well, I should speak to the highlights in the bill, and I can reference pages, Mr. Chairman, if you like. But there's a lot of highlights in there, and then the reason that was highlighted like that, we've made recommendations, and that's in your packet also, as to how you might go forward editing or amending this bill. And let me just give you an example real quick, if I can find the bill. So for instance, on page 12, you see on page 12, line 6, you see a strikeout. And the strikeout is exactly that title of that committee, the Division Advisory Board. That's an example of a simple edit. But when we get into the highlights, like on page 13, the whole section B has been highlighted. But on line 6, for instance, you can see Division Advisory Committee in this case. That would probably be struck out also. And we would substitute, for instance, SEO staff in this case, if it were in the case of setting up as an example, setting up an election for a control area advisory board, which seldom comes along, by the way. So that's in your packet. You'll find recommendations on how to highlight or amend or edit those highlighted areas as an example on page 13. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Sir, so I have a question, Representative Brown first.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm just kind of curious. How many control areas do we have throughout the state? I know we've got the one here in Laramie County. I was shocked to hear it's been 6 years since we've implemented that. How many other control areas do we have around the state?
And Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Engineer.
We have just 3 control areas and are all generally in the southeast as part of the state of Wyoming. Those areas where we can develop groundwater, for instance. There's a lot of areas in the state of Wyoming that groundwater is really not available like this, and or it's not used for agriculture in particular.
And maybe just the southeast part of the state needs more control in general. Okay. Anything, any further questions for our state engineer? Any further questions for our state engineer?
Mr. Chairman.
All right, Chairman Bone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of those control areas is in Platte County, so be careful. It's not just Laramie County down here, but so just if you could step through who actually makes the decisions here within these control areas, and just kind of step through the process. Obviously, we're talking about, limiting resources, conserving resources, important resources for our state. And so I just want to make it clear who's making the final determination and what role exactly does the advisory board play in that decision-making process. And maybe if you just give some examples as to the input that they've had and whether that's actually affecting the outcomes in these control areas.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr.
Please
Chairman.
proceed. Please proceed.
First of all, it's important that this Division Advisory Committee on Underground Water is separate and apart from the control area boards. And so the control area boards will continue to exist, and play a very vital part in making decisions in control areas in particular. So if you're in a control area now and an application comes forward, and it's an application greater than 25 gallons per minute, greater than a domestic or a stock well, for instance. So larger irrigation wells, for instance, high production wells, then those are taken to the advisory board. And then also at that time, the advisory board takes public input. And so together with the advisory board and public input, then that information comes back to us as to whether we're going to permit them or not. Certain permits can also be contested. And if then contested, they'll go to a contested case hearing. So it has a higher order, if you will, for taking testimony and then that is put together in findings of fact and recommendations back to the state engineer ultimately for the decision as to whether or not that well would be permitted.
Follow-up, Chairman. Okay. Representative Brown.
Just one follow-up question. I'm just kind of curious. I don't want to say recent because it's been a while, but the development of oil and gas in the southeastern portion of the state, I'm supposing has a lot to do with the control areas. But I'm just kind of curious if that's what you're talking about when you're talking about these high capacity wells. Is that the majority of these that are applying for these exceptions, or are you having other producers, not oil and gas, looking at using this groundwater?
So we're getting into some of the details of the water of your agency and what you do, but it's a good general question just for information. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amount of water that goes to oil and gas development, comparatively speaking to water that goes to irrigation out of groundwater sources, is relatively small, quite frankly. You can apply for a miscellaneous well, specifically for oil and gas water and production. You'll find that it's time limited. In other words, it's not a permanent water right, and it's usually got a 10-year burn time on that. And or you can file for a temporary water use agreement. I can take out of production a certain amount of crops I take then calculate the consumptive use that I pull out of the groundwater, and I can temporarily use that and sell that to oil and gas production.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on this advisory, potential elimination of the groundwater division advisory committees? Further discussion? The discussion? Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you,
There
Mr.
may be, and certainly I'll defer to the chairman of Ag, who's also on Select Water. If there may be some interest in having them at least get an overview of what this committee may be considering at one of their succeeding meetings. So you may be asked to present on this again at another one of our sister committee meetings, just so we're all on the same page and we don't get to the floor with a bill and every water user in the state thinks we're trying to, anyway. We'll maybe circle some things and make sure we have our I's and T's and all that in order. So further discussion on this advisory committee. All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right, anyone else here going to speak to any of the other potential items, or does committee, and I don't see anybody jumping up. Mr. Lewis in the background, and I don't know who you are against the wall, but I don't see you jumping up to speak to any of these. Anybody online, Amanda?
Mr. Chairman, we have no one else online.
No one online. It's noon. All right. Committee members, do you have any questions about any of these that haven't been spoken about? Any questions from the committee? Must be the brunch doldrums. We're not engaging very much. All right, further public comment? Further public comment? Seeing none? All right. Committee, I guess we also have another choice in this one. We heard no comments saying what about or suggestions for amendments. Ms. Bodwins, you're looking at me inquisitively. You got something you want to? Okay. We heard no comments or suggestions or concerns about any of these bills or the potential removal of these, repeal of these specified boards and commissions. So as opposed to the last one, the last couple bills where I thought we did have some substantive comments and need further consideration, it's the pleasure of the committee whether you want to move this bill forward for consideration and sponsorship to the budget session coming before us, or if you want to lay it back and we can take it up quickly at the next meeting if there's anything comes up. Second part of that question is Chairman Boner, do you want to weigh in on whether you want this specific water issue to be at least brought forth as a matter for your committee, either the Ag Committee or the Select Water Committee, which you are a member of both, to at least be informed about before this committee took up that part of this bill or the entire bill? So Chairman Boner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recommend the Select Water Committee first and foremost. They're the ones with the most expertise on these matters. And as far as the path forward, I would like to think that it would be adequate if we would, even if we move forward with the bill today, just to let them know. And maybe perhaps with the state engineers suggested amendments, and certainly we can get their input at a later date as it goes through the process in the session. That would be one method. Obviously, depending on our workload, we can also punt this bill as well to the next committee meeting and do that work ahead of time. So given the relative lack of decision-making authority for the groundwater advisory committees, I'd like to think that this would not be terribly controversial. So I feel comfortable moving forward and having whatever cleanup amendments we have later. But once again, it's a question of workload of this committee for our next meeting and how much we want to clear the deck now, how much we want to wait till later.
Well, with the warning that Director Bach gave us that she has a half a day for us at the next meeting, just alone, maybe we should clear some deck. All right, committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move the bill for sponsorship.
All right, so there's a motion, Representative Brown, and the second from Representative Stivar to move 22 LSO 0076 draft working version 0.5 for sponsorship by the Management Audit Committee. Further discussion on that? Chairman Boner.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the state engineer's suggested amendments as it deals with the groundwater advisory committee. And for the sake of the public, basically it's saying the state engineer as state engineer's designee would take over the role of the groundwater advisory committee as it relates to the process with the advisory groups for the control areas. And that's my understanding of it.
All right, so there's a motion from Senator Boner, a second from Representative Brown to incorporate the suggested amendments. And I think we'll give our LSO a little bit of license to make sure that they work in the same way that they need to, with intent at least, of the amendments. Any further discussion on that from the committee? Further discussion from the committee? Seeing none. All those in favor of amending the bill based on the recommendations that have been brought forth, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising their hand.
Aye. Aye.
All right, all those opposed, no, or raise your hand. Thank you. The motion has been adopted to adopt the amendments into the bill. So we're at kind of an interesting spot here. Now we have an amended bill before us, and I'm comfortable going to the final thing. If somebody has concerns, we can certainly have a reconsideration if we adopt the motion to sponsor this bill. If somebody has concerns, whether it's from your committee or your colleagues or something else, we can certainly have a motion to reconsider the bill, amend the bill at our next meeting, and then proceed with it. So doesn't mean we can never look at it again. We can certainly reconsider the motion to sponsor and amend the bill and then go forth again. So I just want folks in the public, I'm saying that because the public likely did not have these amendments available to them. And if there are concerns, or that we get concerns from our colleagues that have expertise in the water world, we can certainly take that up. So further discussion on the bill as amended. Further discussion on the bill as amended. Seeing none, so we're going to vote on the motion by Representative Brown made that initial motion to sponsor the repeal of specified states and boards and commissions 0076 with no further comment. Somebody's calling the roll. All right, Ms. Abigail, would you please call the roll on this sponsorship?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 22 LSO 0076 version 5 as amended. Senator Bouchard. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator James. Senator Perkins.
Aye.
Representative Brown. Representative Gray. Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Stivar. Vice Chairman Boner. Chairman Barlow. Mr. Chairman, that is a 10 aye, 0 no.
10 ayes. Thank you very much. So we have our first bill for consideration in the upcoming budget session. Thank you, committee, as I mentioned, and members of the public that may be participating in person or remotely. Certainly, if something comes up that needs to be considered or there's further considerations, we have that option to revisit this bill and can make some adjustments if they are so necessary. With that, members, we're going to, I guess we're 7 minutes behind schedule now. First of all, I want to thank the executive branch folks who came today, provided us testimony or non-testimony in the case of the commissioner who just let it be. So thank you to the governor's office, Ms. Anderson. Thank you very much for assisting in this process. And certainly we look forward to more things. As you might have heard this morning, in our first session, we had a discussion with State Auditor Racinas about funds and accounts that the legislature may want to look at deciding if we need to continue with them and their purpose, et cetera. So certainly encourage you and invite you to be a part of that discussion, as well as Auditor Racinas will work with the different agencies as they are implicated in those or use those funds, but certainly there'll be more discussion about things we can hopefully clear the books a little bit. So, all right, thank you. And if there are more of these type agencies, entities, et cetera, continue that work and we will take them up at any time. We'll continue to be willing to do that. So with that, members, I think we're going to take our lunch break now. We will reconvene at 1:30. I'm going to make a couple of comments, just in general comments. I'm not returning to the meeting this afternoon. As you know, we're on Friday. There's going to be a service in memory of Senator Enzi, U.S. Senator Enzi, former representative of the state of Wyoming, former senator in the Wyoming Senate, former mayor of Gillette. I bought my first pair of tennis shoes from former senator, mayor, legislator in my growing up years on Main Street in Gillette. So this evening, there's some planning activities and some things going on that I'm assisting the family with. So I'm going to depart for part of that. And then tomorrow we have some more activities in preparation for what we think will be a fairly significant memorial service. Several thousand people, including there's about 55 legislators and former legislators that are going to participate. We're expecting folks from the public. So I guess on behalf of myself, and some of you may have seen, the President Dockstetter and I put out a brief statement, expressing our sorrow on behalf of the entire legislature. But just in this forum, I want to invite anybody in the public that certainly wants to join the family and the community of Gillette in Northeast Wyoming and commemorating him, whether you're there physically or just in a moment of prayer on Friday at 1 p.m. at the Pronghorn Center on Gillette College. And that's when the service will be. So anyway, we thank you, all those who have had prayers and reached out, and the family has been, I've spoken with a representative of a member of the family, and they've been really overcome with the amount of love and support that their family has received, and that the loss of a father, a husband, a grandfather, of course, to them, but certainly a dedicated public servant to the state of Wyoming and to this nation. So certainly something that touches us all a little differently. And I can still remember the color and the texture of those shoes when he took them out of the box a long time ago. So thank you for your work this morning. Senator Boner will take over this afternoon and chair the meeting. And we visited about some of the things on the plate before us. There certainly are some things that we're trying to get with our staff. Our staff now has just made a couple of hires. So we thank our administrator for making hires. So we're getting closer to fully staffed. And so we'll be able to take on some more activities that this committee, I think, is not that we don't have a capable staff, but we have now more staff to spread the workload around a little bit. And so we'll be able to take on those. So with that, we are in recess until Chairman Boner, who at 1:30 or they're close to, will call you back to order. Thank you for your work, and